Hello guys, how are you all? Today we are back with another blazing Naruto story. What if female Naruto get pregnant and runs away with her boyfriend? If you enjoy this video, then please like, share and do comment. And also check the description to original creator of this beautiful creation. So let us start the story.
Naruto stared at herself in the mirror. She was only wearing an orange tank top and pair of underwear, and she was angled sideways from the mirror. A hand coasted over her belly button, which was bulged out a little. Her hand stopped and she cradled the tiny bulge. Her voice broke and then she regained control. If you're what I think you are. She trailed off, unable to continue. A baby. She might be pregnant. It seemed impossible, but sometimes there was no such thing as impossible. If she was, how could she hide it? She was only a little girl. She still had to go to the academy and graduate and be shinobi and be Hokage. She couldn't do that if she was going to have a baby. She sighed and rubbed her tiny bulge again. Baby. She turned away from the mirror before she could see her own unconsciously wistful smile. A family. They all thought she was a boy. Well, the younger ones did. She was sure that most of the older folks were supposed to know that she was a girl, but since she never dressed in pink or did her hair or played tea party, instead running with the boys and messing in the dirt for the first 10 years of her life, they must have pretty much forgotten that she wasn't a he. It wasn't like she had guardians to remind them by talking about her anyway. She didn't really care. They could think whatever they wanted. And now that she was pregnant, she figured that it would only help her cover. Thankfully, her too large orange jumpsuit hid most of the belly, and a tiny distraction hinge over that area minimized the growing bump. And when she wasn't feeling up to hiding, she just skipped the academy altogether. So she looked at the average women in the streets, rather than the hookers and magazine ladies, and she decided on a new form that was far more average than her Y form. There would be no whisker marks on her cheeks, her hair would stay the same as it was when she was normal. She'd just be a bit more girly. And pregnant. So now she was 14, instead of 10, and she was standing outside of where she'd seen several shinobi drop off their children for the day. Sometimes for more than one day. But hey, that meant that they could care for the baby for as long as Naruto didn't want to look after it, right? Excuse me? Naruto called out, opening the door cautiously. She was met by a large lady with red circular marking on her cheeks. The woman smiled down at her. Hello there, dear. What can I do to help you? Naruto brushed her hand over the gentle swell of her belly. I am pregnant. Her voice was startlingly small and the woman gasped, bringing a hand up to cover her mouth as her eyes widened. I just wanted to see where shinobi children go when their parents are on missions. You know, if there isn't a babysitter? Naruto had long decided that when she was in her new 14-year-old form, she'd refer to the academy as a mission. It would be easier to remember not to mess up then. Of course, dear. I'm Akamichi Mito. Mito bowed a little to her, and this is the daycare. Naruto bit her lip as she introduced her new Y form to the woman, Yamamoto Tatsumaki. You're very young to be having a baby, Yamamoto-san, Mito commented as she showed Naruto around the daycare. Naruto wasn't too impressed with the simple name of the place, having a liking for grand gestures and names and things. I might not be keeping it, Naruto muttered. However, young Mito thought she was. Naruto was a lot younger. If the woman thought that 14 was too young, Naruto wondered what she would think if she knew that Naruto was only 10. Naruto had chosen 14 for her new body for several reasons. One was because it was young, which she was. Another was that in her 20s she would be able to merge her new Y and her real body. No one would comment on the missing or extra years, and then she wouldn't need to be under her jutsu other than covering the markings on her cheeks. And she wouldn't have to be Uzumaki Naruto, either. Naruto didn't like being herself. You might be giving the child up for adoption? Mito asked, curious. Well, as you said, I'm really young. But I sort of wanted to check out my options, you know? So, you babysit for shinobi? Giving the child up wasn't what she had been thinking, but she didn't want to commit to anything. Mito nodded. Most shinobi are either orphans or have small families if they aren't from one of the 7 major clans. She paused and then amended quickly, 6 clans. It's rare that a shinobi will marry, or live with, a civilian who is willing to be the stay-at-home parent. Since children are precious, we have several types of defenses, those of which include seals on all the doors and windows. We have 3 full-time employees and a genin team that is assigned to us for a week at a time. Naruto nodded as she listened. taking in the brightness of the place and the laughter of the children as they played. Not to sound stupid or anything, but do you have shinobi training? Oh yes, dear, I'm Chunin, as are my two other full-time employees. The Genin team comes with their Junin sensei and we have a rotating crew of Junin volunteers who take shifts and act as guards for the children. Naruto thought that was very good. Knowing that your child was protected by Junin volunteers, elite ninja who would give their life for your child, was comforting. She just had to make sure that no one saw through Tatsumaki. That was, if she kept the child. Having a baby was excruciating, Naruto found out, panting in pain and fear, laying on her bed with her legs spread and her hands clenched in her sheets. It was probably only made worse by the fact that she was too young and too small to be having a baby and that she was having her baby by herself without a midwife. And she was missing her graduation exam. Stupid baby couldn't wait a few days or have come earlier. No, it had to be born today. That part really galled her. But she knew that she wouldn't be able to hold her Tatsumaki jutsu while pushing a damned baby out, so she was doing it herself. She was used to doing things without help anyway. Another labor pain came and Naruto threw back her head and screamed, thankfully knowing that the soundproofing jutsu on her apartment would hold. She'd tested it before and it had held up to 74 hours of intense noise even while she'd stabbed herself in the hand, testing its integrity when she was in pain. When the labor pain waned, she fervently swore that she would never have another baby. One was more than enough. And damn was she glad that she'd been able to hunt down and kill the manipulative bastard who had gotten her trust and then raped her. He certainly hadn't expected her to get up off the ground a minute after leaving her in the alley and follow him into the red light district and proceed to stab him in the kidneys, cut off his balls, then everything else, then stab him in the neck, letting him bleed to death while she watched with fire in her eyes, still bleeding from the assault. It had been a heady experience to kill, but the sense of vengeance that she'd experienced while doing so had soothed her wounded soul a lot. Thinking back to what several of the pregnancy books had said about having a baby at home, she hauled herself to her feet and shuffled around her bedroom, a hand pressed lightly to her belly and another to her back. She didn't know how dilated she was since she refused to look at herself in a mirror, but she knew that it was close. She'd already been in labor for 8 hours. If it went on for very much longer, she'd soon take a kunai to her belly and cut the baby out. It'd be okay, she'd heal. She didn't know how she could heal like she could, but she now suspected that it had something to do with the great honking black seal tattoo that was flashing with red chakra around her belly button. Which, incidentally, was now an outie instead of an innie. She'd only mildly freaked out when she'd woken up one morning to find that her belly button had popped out. She just hoped that once the baby was out, her belly button would go back to normal. Another cramp started and she hurried as fast as she could over to the collection of blankets that she'd set up sort of like a nest. She wasn't very tall, so the baby wouldn't fall very far, and when she crouched, the baby's head ought to reach the soft nest of blankets before it was entirely out of her. She'd read the books and knew that it was best to either be sitting in a pool of water or standing when giving birth at home. Since she didn't have anyone to help her in the bathtub, there was really only one option left. Let gravity do its thing. Her hands clenched tight into fists and she pounded the wall in pain, screaming as it felt like she was being torn open. The pain continued and she kept screaming, and then suddenly, she wasn't the only one screaming. A thin, soft cry came from the nest below her and she barely managed to move to the side before falling over, hands holding her cramping belly. She rested, breathing hard, relieved that it was over, and stared at the bloody, wiggling thing that was laying in the nest. It had really light hair from what she could see through the blood, and she reached out to the baby, wiping away the blood and gunk from its eyes. And its eyes were sky blue. Recovering faster than she'd ever read about, Naruto pulled a towel and the bucket of now lukewarm water to her and carefully picked the slippery baby up, putting it in her lap and cleaning it as gently as she could. It was a boy, she quickly found. She had a son. Hirohito wouldn't stop crying. Naruto didn't know what to do. She'd changed him, she'd feed him, and hadn't that been weird? Milk coming from her non-existent and still completely flat boobs? She'd even damn well sung, which she'd never been very good at. She hadn't yet started to regret not putting Hirohito up for adoption, but it was getting close. Finally, having had enough, Naruto quickly jutsued into Tatsumaki and got together the baby bag. She wrapped Hirohito up in his red, orange, and yellow baby blanket and tucked him in close to her body. She had walked 2 blocks in the direction of the daycare when she realized that Hirohito wasn't screaming anymore. She looked down in surprise to find the baby was smiling happily, his bright blue eyes staring at everything he could see. Deciding to just keep walking, she started to hum under her breath, and within a half hour, Hirohito was sleeping like a log. What a relief, she thought to herself, careful not to disturb his rest as she adjusted him in her arms, and she turned back in the direction of her apartment building to go home and put the kid to bed so she could go back to sleep. Almost immediately she stumbled over something. She wasn't sure what it was, but she tripped and halfway to the ground, more than 2 strong arms and hands caught her and settled her back upright. Naruto frantically checked Hirohito over, making sure he wasn't hurt by her near fall. To her surprise, he hadn't even woken up. "Excuse me," an owner of some of the hands which had caught her spoke up, drawing her attention to the older woman. "Are you all right, miss?" "The baby?" The woman was wearing a white ribbony dress and a hite. Naruto smiled broadly. "I'm fine, so is Hirohito-chan. Thank you." She trailed off, hoping for a name. "Yuhi Kurenai," the woman smiled, her red eyes brightening at the news that the baby was all right. "Junin of Konoha." "Thank you, Kurenai-san." Naruto finished her thanks. "I'm Yamamoto Tatsumaki. This is my son, Hirohito-chan." Kurenai looked her over with a stern eye. "Tatsumaki-san, not to be rude, but you're very young to be a mother." "I know," Naruto chuckled low in the back of her throat, faking her humor, "so I've been told." She looked to the other person who had helped catch her and was stunned, almost speechless by the sheer amount of green before her. "I am Meta Guy," he exclaimed in a whisper. "I am most pleased that Hirohito-chan is safe and well. Thank you, Guy-san, for helping Kurenai-san catch me and protect my baby." "I am most pleased," Guy repeated, bowing to her gallantly. "Would you like accompaniment to your place of residence?" he asked her in his bold voice. Naruto shook her head. "I'll be okay," but again, she looked between the 2 Junin. "Thank you." "Tatsumaki-san," Kurenai mused slowly. "How old is Hirohito-chan?" Naruto frowned. "He's a month and a half," she said, a warning note in her tone. She was thankful that they had helped her, made sure that Hirohito hadn't been injured, but there were limits to her generosity. Information about her son was precious and not to be tossed around like party favors. "Why?" Naruto felt a splash of surprise when Kurenai blushed. "Oh, just. I've always liked children," she said, her eyes not moving from Hirohito's face. Guy moved suddenly. "I believe that Hirohito shall be." He broke his speech, looking at the badly flinching teenager in front of him. He lowered his voice and moved back a few steps. "I am humbly sorry that I have caused distress within you, Tatsumaki-san." Trying to steady herself, Naruto wondered if she would ever get over her irrational fear of men. She was only 10, almost 11, and she flinched even when Iruka turned to her suddenly in the classroom. She didn't like being so weak. "There is nothing to be sorry about, Guy-san," she forced herself to say evenly. "I was just startled by how fast you moved." A sardonic smile lifted her lips. "After all, I did just trip." Guy nodded, though the look on his face said that he didn't really believe her. Kurenai still hadn't managed to tear her gaze away from Hirohito. "Tatsumaki-san," Kurenai spoke up, "would you mind terribly if I held Hirohito-chan for a few moments?" Naruto frowned and looked Kurenai up and down. Finally she nodded. She didn't want to give her son over to someone else, but Kurenai had just saved her a tumble and, at worst, Hirohito's life. She should at least give the woman something in return. "Come here," Naruto said, and Kurenai's face lit up. "Be careful with his neck, he's very fragile. If you wake him up, so help me, I'll make you be the one to get him back to sleep." "Of course," Kurenai whispered, carefully adjusting the baby in her arms. Naruto watched the Junin with a keen eye even as she turned her face slightly towards Guy. "Would you like a turn holding Hirohito-chan, Guy-san?" She didn't really want her son, her only family, to be passed around like a party favor, but Guy had also helped her when she had stumbled. She was sure that he wouldn't do anything to harm a baby he'd just helped to save. She wasn't expecting to see a look of shock fill his eyes that he shuddered away so quickly. She wasn't sure she'd actually seen it. "That is quite all right, blossoming flower of Konoha," he was still whispering. "I do not wish to part you and your youthful son." A little dazed and a little wary of the man, Naruto could still see that Guy was powerful. Given that he was showcasing his body like nuts in the odd bodysuit that he wore instead of a regular uniform, Naruto was pretty sure that he was very good at physical pursuits. Striking up a conversation, Naruto nodded to his clothing. I take it, Guy-san, that you are a physical person? Ah, you have noticed my beautiful power suit. Guy struck a pose and Naruto was sure that he was moving slower than he usually did because of her earlier reaction to him. Indeed, I am an expert in taijutsu. Curious, Naruto pursed her lips. Have you mastered many styles of taijutsu? I have mastered all the great styles of taijutsu that I have seen, Guy exclaimed in a quiet voice. I have a dedication to taijutsu in all its forms. Guy looked her up and down and Naruto repressed a shiver at being so closely examined. You're shinobi as well? Yeah, Naruto smiled brightly. Technically not a shinobi, but she was in training to be one and that counted for her. I'm pretty bad at taijutsu though, so I wouldn't be the best person to talk with about it. I understand, Guy nodded, almost seriously. Naruto found him much too quirky to take very seriously. Would you be willing to work hard if I were to offer lessons to you? Naruto blinked and then blinked again. What the hell? So because she was someone else, someone not Uzumaki Naruto, she was offered free lessons right off the bat. She didn't even know the man and he seemed completely serious about teaching her hand-to-hand fighting. She bit her lip and then nodded. I would like that, thank you. We shall most gloriously find a fitting style for you to train in and utilize. Kurenai looked over her shoulder at Guy then with a glare and hissed, hush, you loudmouth. You'll wake Hirohito-chan up. Another graduating exam. She could totally deal with it. At least this time she wasn't giving birth. Not that she didn't love Hirohito very much, but really? A child at such a young age? Not something she wanted to repeat for a very long time. Though, she had found that Hirohito was something of a bomb on her soul when she would pick him up from the daycare and take him home. He was someone that loved her unconditionally, whether she looked like herself or like Tatsumaki. She had decided that she would take Hirohito to the daycare for 3 days of the week, and never the same 3 days, while she skipped out of class on the other 2 days to play with him. She still occasionally pranked people, but only enough to keep it in their minds that that's what she did. Iruka would sometimes ask her if everything was alright, but she never let on that she was a child mother. She didn't want Hirohito taken away from her. So, exam time again and then Hirohito's birthday when she got home. She was pretty excited about that. She was able to barely pass the taijutsu portion of the exam, thanks to her Saturday lessons with Guy. He'd been wholly unimpressed with her taijutsu when she'd shown him what she didn't know and he had quickly started to correct her stance and understanding of that style of combat. Thankfully he didn't expect her to grow proficient very fast due to the fact that she was an active shinobi and a single mother. At least, he thought she was an active shinobi. She'd totally bombed the written test though. As she looked over her test, the red splashes of color vibrant and mocking, she wondered if maybe she should have been studying her totally idiotic textbooks instead of using them for target practice. Alright, now we'll be testing ninjutsu, the last portion of the exam. Iruka spoke loudly and clearly from the head of the class. We'll call your name and you will go to the neighboring classroom. There we will randomly ask for you to perform either a bunshin, a kawarimi, or a henge. How well you perform your designated ninjutsu will be marked by 2 teachers and an average grade will be given to you from those marks. After receiving your final mark, the teacher will combine all 3 marks and the average grade for the entire exam will be assigned to you. You will be told after you complete the ninjutsu part of the exam if you have passed or not. Iruka looked around the classroom sternly. If you pass, you will be given a Hite Ite and become a fully fledged shinobi of Konohagakure. If you do not pass, you will not receive a Hite Ite and no amount of begging will change our minds. How hard you work determines if you deserve to serve this village as shinobi or not. Everyone in the classroom was silent. Iruka perked up. We will be calling you alphabetically, starting with the A class. When we have called everyone from all 4 classes, we will continue on to those who signed up to take an early graduation exam. Naruto exclaimed wordlessly, pounding on the desk she was borrowing for the duration of her early exam. What do mean, Iruka-sensei? Why'd I gotta go last? That was complete and utter bullshit. She had to hang around this stupid classroom for hours, waiting for her name to get called when she was the only early participant. She had things to do today. Like Hirohito's birthday. Shut up, Naruto, Iruka sighed. rubbing his forehead. We allowed you to sign up for the early exam again even though you blew off last year's. You sit right there and don't you dare walk out. Iruka's face got really scary and he leaned forward, his eye twitching. If you leave that spot right there, I will hunt you down and drag you back. Naruto flinched back and then shook off the feeling of being cornered. She had a whole room behind her, she wasn't cornered. Whatever, Iruka-sensei. She huffed loudly and slumped into her chair. So she sat, and she waited, and waited some more, and spat spitballs at the three Hyugas in the class because they kept spouting off about their all-seeing eyes or whatever. The fact that they couldn't see the spitballs hanging from their long hair just made her laugh. It made a lot of the other kids laugh too, and thankfully the stuck-up bastards were called to the other classroom before they'd realized why everyone else was laughing at them. After the Hyugas had gotten called, it was the Inuzuka kids and then the Naras. There were other kids, from civilian families or small shinobi families, but it was the clan children that all came back with a look on their face that said, "Of course I passed. I'm so-and-so clan." It was like they were guaranteed passage into the shinobi world by way of their family. When the final Yamanaka and the one last civilian kid had been tested, Iruka looked at Naruto. "Your turn, Naruto-kun." Naruto heaved a loud sigh, unable to hold it back. "Thank the gods. I've been here for hours. It would do you well to learn a little patience," Iruka commented lightly as he led Naruto across the hall. He sat behind the desk with another teacher. Naruto recognized her as Hitomi-sensei, who had taken the assistant teacher's position when Mizuki had been found dead and mutilated in an alley, mysteriously murdered nearly 2 years ago. Hitomi rested her weight on her elbows and leaned forwards. "Okay, Uzumaki-san. Your ninjutsu test is the creation of 3 clones." Naruto could feel the whole world fall out from underneath her. She couldn't do clones. She could do every other type of E-rank they could possibly ask, but not the Bunshin. She'd already failed the written test as well. She was so screwed, but she tried anyway. "Bunshin no Jutsu," she cried out, her hands perspiring as they held the sign required for making clones. Not a single clone appeared, much less the asked for 3. Iruka shook his head, looking over the marks that he had in front of him. He didn't need to average out Naruto's grade. Naruto didn't even need to average her grade. 2 out of 3 bomb tests equaled a big, fat fail. Hitaki Kakashi smiled as he watched the children. He was on one of his many volunteer shifts as a guard over the Shinobi Day Care Center for the children of ninja on duty who needed a babysitter that could be called upon at any time, day or night. A tiny hand tugged on his pants and he looked down to see the cutest little silvery blonde-haired kid ever looking up at him. Era? The child couldn't have been more than 18 months old, and the fact that he was walking, or at least toddling with a minor amount of falls, spoke of either high intelligence or high curiosity. With children, it could be either. Or both. Most likely both. "Hello." Kakashi hunkered down on his toes, crouching and settling his hands under the child's arms to steady him. "And what are you doing all the way over here?" he asked, his eye curving up in an upside-down smile. The child stared at him with the widest, bluest eyes Kakashi had seen in years and reached out to his face. Kakashi chuckled as the child fumbled at the mask covering his face. He wasn't dexterous enough to get his fingers under the edge of the mask to pull it down, but he was valiantly trying anyway. Standing up and settling the child on his hip, Kakashi made his way back to the main area of the daycare. The child continued to fumble at his mask and Kakashi couldn't help but keep laughing because instead of getting angry at his failure, the kid was giggling gaily at the challenge. "Oh, Kakashi-san," and Akamichi strode over to him and the boy and reached out for the child. "Thank you for bringing Hito-chan back. He just keeps slipping away from us." Kakashi regretfully handed Hito off to the daycare worker as she turned her attention to the boy. "And you just keep getting out of that dreadful pen." She cooed, "You really are your mother's son, Hito-chan," vanishing without a trace. She gave him a gentle Eskimo kiss, rubbing their noses together, and Hito laughed at her antics, patting her cheeks gently. "Ma, it's no trouble," Kakashi murmured. "Thank you anyway, Kakashi-san." The Akamichi looked over her shoulder at the Junin as she walked back to the dreadful pen that Hito had already escaped once from. Unable to stop himself, Kakashi took a step after them. "Did you want me to keep an extra eye on Hito-chan? In case he gets out again?" "Oh, you don't have to. I'd like to." Kakashi waved her protests off. "I have a special feeling about that kid." He's going to be a handful. She laughed and shook her head at him. He already is a handful. But if you're willing to keep an eye out for him, I would greatly appreciate it. He's a little escape artist. Thank you, Kakashi-san. As she walked away, back to the other children in the playroom, Kakashi murmured to himself, more than willing. Someone cleared their throat from behind him and Kakashi looked over his shoulder at the blonde teenager that was staring at him with laughter in her blue eyes. Can I help you? He asked, thinking that she was another volunteer guard for the daycare. I'd like to go home. She smiled broadly, her face lighting up. She tucked a short lock of hair over her ear and Hito, still in Kakashi's hands, squealed. Ka-chan, Ka-chan. Hito made grasping motions at the young woman and it took a moment for Kakashi to realize that this teenager wasn't a babysitter or guard, but a family member. The boy was obviously confusing his mother with his sister. He looked down to Hito and then to her and he could very clearly see the resemblance between them. If Hito's whole family looked so similar, it wouldn't be a surprise that Hito couldn't see the differences as young as he was. I apologize, Kakashi murmured, standing up and cradling the 15-month-old to his chest. I hadn't realized you were Hito-chan's sister. Instead of laughing or waving it off, the blonde frowned. I'm his mother, she said flatly, all humor draining from her. Kakashi balked. How old are you? It doesn't matter, she shook his question off. I am Yamamoto Tatsumaki and you have my son. I'd like to go home now, please. Of course, Kakashi rocked Hito a bit before handing the boy to his mother. Gods, but Kakashi was shocked by how young she looked. Tatsumaki smiled brightly at Hito and kissed his nose. Hey there, Chibi, she whispered to him as she started back to the desk to sign her son out of the logbook. Kakashi watched the teenager leave and when he couldn't see her anymore, went to the desk to talk to the head of the daycare. Do you know how old Yamamoto-san is, Mito-san? I don't think it's any of your business, Akamichi Mito said in a warning tone. You're too attached to Hito-chan in the first place. I'm not going to stalk Yamamoto-san or Hito-chan, Kakashi replied with a bit of bite to his words. I was just wondering when it had become acceptable for a 13-year-old to get pregnant. All teenagers experiment, Mito sighed. I guess it just went too far. Yamamoto-san is taking responsibility for the baby though, so that speaks well of her. Curious now, Kakashi cocked his head to the side. Do you know who the father is? Hito looks just like Yamamoto-san. I couldn't see any influence of the patriarch except a little in the hair color under the sun. Hito's hair was gold, just like Tatsumaki's, but at times, under most light sources, it would shimmer with silver highlights. Yamamoto-san didn't say, Mito commented, opening the file drawer and pulling a file. Ah, here, she flipped the file open and browsed it. No, she didn't state a father, though she did say that the other parent is deceased. I see, Kakashi murmured to himself. Deceased could mean a lot of different things for Shinobi. She could be hiding who the father was or she could be telling the truth. No one would know unless they knew her and her situation. She was a little bit of a mystery and Kakashi liked mysteries because he rarely found one that he couldn't figure out within moments. How long has she been bringing Hito-chan here? Well, she first started visiting when she was pregnant. Mito looked over the file again. Her file says that she requested to be allowed to observe the daycare to see if it was what she wanted. I remember her from her first visit. Mito put the file down and leaned back in her chair. She mentioned in the beginning that she wasn't sure that she would be keeping the baby, but as you can see, she didn't put Hito-chan up for adoption or give him to the orphanage, so we know what she decided. She was going to give Hito-chan up? Kakashi frowned. She obviously loves him immensely. Why would she be unsure whether she was keeping him or not? Mito shrugged and shook her head. I can't comprehend giving a child up, but perhaps her family was forcing her to get rid of the baby once she refused to abort it. What does the file say about her family? Kakashi asked, his curiosity growing. Who are the emergency contacts? Mito frowned as she read the file. Nothing about her family and as for the contacts. Just her. Mito's voice was confused, as though she didn't know what was going on. I don't understand. We don't allow children into the daycare without two contacts, especially the main contact is an active shinobi. We need someone that can be responsible for the child even if it's a neighbor. Curiouser and curiouser, Kakashi muttered. Mito sighed, I'll have to ask her tomorrow morning for another contact number. If she can't provide one, we'll have to turn her away. Kakashi shot a sharp look at the Akamichi. What are you talking about? Hito-chan's been coming here since before he was born, and just now you're going to refuse to take him in? What is Yamamoto-san supposed to do then? She's shinobi, she has missions. I apologize, Kakashi-san, but under our rules, we need to have 2 contacts for every child. She can go to the orphanage to get another contact number in the most dire of circumstances, but we don't raise children at the daycare, we babysit. Mito was honestly feeling bad about having to tell Tatsumaki that the daycare couldn't take Hito in the morning. Kakashi could see that. Biting his lip, Kakashi looked at Mito with a dark eye. Mito-san, do you trust me? Mito looked at him with wide eyes. Of course, Kakashi-san. Put me down as Hito-chan's second contact, his emergency contact. Kakashi-san, Mito exclaimed, shocked. I'll tell Yamamoto-san tomorrow that I'm her son's emergency contact, and that for now, she can use me. When she finds someone else to use, that's fine, but for now, Kakashi shrugged one shoulder. I like Hito-chan. I wouldn't mind taking responsibility for him for a while if something happens to Yamamoto-san. Mito stared at Kakashi with still wide eyes, but put the file on the desk and got out a pen. She continued to glance up at him while she put his name on the file. Kakashi couldn't help but smile at Mito and wave goodbye as he left. He felt surprisingly alive at the moment. Maybe he would visit Guy and see what game his old friend would challenge him with. So, why did you have Hito so young anyway? Mitarashi Anko swung her feet back and forth as she leaned back on her seat, watching Tatsumaki out of the corner of her eye. She'd been introduced to the young mother by Guy several months ago and had taken an almost instant liking to the blonde and her son. I mean, you're what, 16? That means you got pregnant when you were late 13 or 14 because Hito's almost 2, right? Tatsumaki went very still and blinked slowly. I was very young when I got pregnant, yes. She tucked a short lock of blonde hair behind her ear and looked down at the ground. It wasn't planned, Anko-san. Anko smirked, her crassness coming out in full force. So where's the father? Your boyfriend diddle you and run off? Oh, Tatsumaki's tan face went pale and all emotion fled her eyes. I was diddled, all right. She stood and walked away, never turning back even with Anko calling after her, first in patronization and then worry. Anko watched her young friend walk away and suddenly she realized what had happened to make the boisterous teenager so quiet and shut down. Hirohito was the result of rape. It must have happened on a mission, Anko figured, a little horrified to realize that she had brought up some very bad memories that Tatsumaki had obviously never had the chance to deal with. Anko? Yuhi Kurenai's voice startled Anko and the Tokubetsu Junin turned wide eyes to the genjutsu expert. You know Tatsumaki-chan, right? Yes, Kurenai drew out slowly, unsure of where Anko was going with her enquiry. Why? You know her son, Hito-chan? He's an adorable kid. Anko bit her lip in indecision before nodding sharply to herself. Tatsumaki got pregnant on a mission. By an enemy shinobi. Kurenai's face blanched, but that means she would have been raped. She wasn't able to say it out loud. Yeah, Anko spat at the ground, furious at both herself for bringing the subject up and at Maki's Junin sensei for not helping the woman when she'd needed it. Her Junin sensei never got her any counseling either. Horrified, Kurenai sat carefully beside Anko. How do you know? I asked her where the father was and she just shut down. Completely. Red eyes wide, Kurenai could feel worry creeping up her spine, raising goosebumps on the back of her neck. Anko, her voice was harsh and quiet. Do you think Tatsumaki-chan would do anything dangerous in her state of mind? The same horror in Kurenai's mind reflected back to her from Anko's eyes as the hubby shinobi thought hard and fast about what little she knew of her friend. I want to say no, because she has Hito-chan, but I can't. Oh gods, Anko stood up, her body practically vibrating with worry. Do you think? She trailed off and Kurenai stood just as fast as Anko had. Go to the daycare. Find out if Tatsumaki has already dropped Hito-chan off or not. If not, warn Akamichi Mito not to let her leave when she gets there. Then go to Training Ground 52. I sometimes see her there with Guy-san. Wait, Anko grabbed her elbow. Where are you going? I'm going to check in with everyone who knows her. Anko's face dropped. What if we don't find her? She whispered in fear. I don't know. Just, Kurenai shook her head. If Hito-chan is at the daycare, tell Kakashi-san to keep a close eye on him and to not let Tatsumaki take him if she comes back for him until we know that she's stable. Kakashi had listened closely to Anko's warning and to her information as to why it was important that he not let Tatsumaki leave his sight if he saw her. It was a little horrifying for him to know that the cute child in his arms, trying to finger paint his mask in pink and orange, was the result of a brutal assault. He'd had a special place in his heart for Hirohito ever since he'd first met the boy, and knowing the pain in Hito's mother's past was just so horrible. Thankfully it was nearing the time when Tatsumaki would normally pick Hito up, so Kakashi was almost impatiently waiting for her to show up. Anko and Kurenai had reported that no one could find her and the mission desk Nin hadn't given out a mission to the blonde Chunin. At least, that's what everyone had decided she must be. She was too powerful to be Genin, but not controlled enough to be Junin. Pretty much anyone who knew the girl was standing watch for her. Maida Guy had showed up at the daycare several hours ago, so far in his worry as to forego his usual training to wait with Kakashi and Hito. Kakashi hadn't known before that afternoon that Tatsumaki would sometimes train with Guy. Guy mentioned that her taijutsu was pretty bad at first but quickly began picking up, as though she had learned it before but had gotten out of practice. That or she was just a natural kinesthetic learner. It made sense for the former though, given that she had only started back to work after presumably going on maternity leave. Hito giggled in his arms and placed his hand against Kakashi's mask, fingers spread, orange paint getting onto his ite. Kakashi smiled and Hito could feel it under his hand. The boy giggled again and Guy turned his attention to the pair. My friend. Guy rarely addressed Kakashi as a friend instead of a rival, but in times of trouble the taijutsu expert became as serious as was needed. Tatsumaki-san is late. Kakashi tickled Hito's ribs absently, only by 15 minutes, Guy. She'll come. How are you sure of this? Guy asked, concerned. She loves Hito-chan, Kakashi muttered, letting Hito nuzzle his neck. The boy was surprisingly animalistic at times. He wondered if it was something that he'd inherited from one of his parents or if he had learned it from watching Tatsumaki. Tatsumaki could be occasionally more feral than an Inuzuka. There had been minor speculation among her friends if there was any relation between her and the Inuzuka clan, but the rumors had gone nowhere and were eventually dropped. Guy nodded to Kakashi's shorthand logic and sat back, as impatient as the copy Nin was to see Tatsumaki and know that she was okay. The gate to the daycare grounds opened and both Nin snapped their attention to it. Hito looked up from where he was chewing on Kakashi's vest collar and started waving his hands in the air wildly. Ka-chan. The boy wiggled like he was made of jello and Kakashi had to set him down for fear of dropping him. Hito toddled his way to Tatsumaki, who lifted the boy and threw him gently into the air before catching him and cuddling him close. Hello, Hito-chan, she murmured into Hito's brilliant, shimmery gold hair that almost matched her own. Were you a good boy today? Kakashi stepped forward then, drawing the teenager's attention. He was excellent, like he always is. Tatsumaki-san, he pursed his lips, are you okay? The look she gave him was of pure blank curiosity. Fake blank curiosity. What do you mean, Kakashi-san? She inquired back. Kakashi took another step towards her and wasn't surprised when she shuffled backwards a little. Are you feeling okay, Tatsumaki-san? Today must have been very hard for you. Today was fine. Tatsumaki shook her head, no different from any other day. She paused and then forced a chuckle out as she looked towards Guy. In fact, today was very good, thanks to all the training you've been going through with me, Guy-san. I truly appreciate your hard work on my taijutsu. Ah, my youthful sparring partner. You honor me with your words. Guy bowed to Tatsumaki and she nodded her head back. Hito ignored everyone and played with his mother's bright hair. Thank you, Kakashi-san, for watching my son. Tatsumaki smiled brokenly and turned to walk away. Kakashi wasn't about to let her leave though, not when she looked like she was going to shatter into a million pieces. Unthinkingly he reached out and grabbed her shoulder to stop her from leaving the daycare grounds. She trembled under his gloved hand and sucked in a frightened breath. Please, let me go. Kakashi dropped his hand like he'd been touching something burning. I apologize, Tatsumaki-san. She stopped speaking, but turned to face the two Junin, burying her face in her son's hair, refusing to look at them. I would just like to be left alone for a while, Kakashi-san, Guy-san. I've been around people all day, and I haven't had a chance to settle myself. Guy spoke this time, catching on to her meaning as fast as Kakashi had. Which people have you been around today, Tatsumaki-san? We looked for you everywhere and asked everyone who knows you, where you were. A highly unusual frown made its way onto Guy's bold face. We were concerned. No need for you to be concerned, Guy-san. The blonde, leggy teenager shook her head and busied her hands with straightening her son's clothing. I'm undergoing a long-term mission. I've been working it for almost 5 years and I have about 3 months left to go. She finished with Hito's clothing and then looked a little lost as she muttered, if nothing else goes wrong. Kakashi's mind was all wrapped up in the mystery of Tatsumaki. She'd been on a mission for almost 5 years. She would have gotten pregnant about halfway through it. She didn't want to get pregnant. She also just said that something had gone wrong on her mission already, and Kakashi was pretty sure that she meant Hito, though she obviously loved Hito now. So then, what was she worried would happen in the next few months? Was it possible that she was being put into situations where she might get pregnant again, that she might be raped again? Tatsumaki-san. Kakashi wanted to step closer to her, to reassure her that it was going to be alright, but he knew that he couldn't. She was still afraid of men, she hadn't dealt with her past and she'd had a shock this morning that she hadn't recovered from. As well as worrying about being raped again on her mission. She blinked, shaken out of her memories and fears and nodded curtly to Kakashi. Again, thank you for looking after Hito-chan. I know he can be a handful since he's got my energy. With nothing else for her to say, she turned back to the road and this time, Kakashi let her go. My friend? Guy spoke up, curiously. He was Junin of course, but he wasn't a genius like Kakashi was. She's afraid that it'll happen again, Kakashi muttered, staring after her retreating form. She thinks she's in danger in her mission, and that she might be raped again. Black despair filled his heart, and we can't do anything to help her because it's a mission. If we interfere with her mission, it could cost her her life, not just her body. Guy's hand settled on his shoulder and Kakashi wondered when it was that he started to trust Guy with not only his professional life, but his personal one as well. Kakashi was a very private person, but Guy seemed to have managed to worm his way in. We'll do all that we can to help protect her, Guy told him softly, knowing what was in Kakashi's heart as well as Kakashi knew, and we'll do all that we can to help her recover once her mission is over. Guy knew, just as Kakashi knew, that they would not be interfering with the mission that she was on. It was horrible to think that such a young teenager had been given such a mission, but they all knew the risks when joining the shinobi ranks and there was nothing that could be done. They could make it worse than it already was if they interfered, or followed her, or tried to get information about what she was doing. So they couldn't do anything at all. Oh my gods. Tatsumaki slumped against Kakashi's side. You wouldn't believe how freaking immature they are. She whined, I know kids that age are supposed to be immature, but really? She rolled her eyes and gestured with a free hand, the other holding the ice cream cone Kakashi had bought for her. Fuck, sometimes it makes me want to bash my head in. She chuckled and brought the ice cream up to lick at it. Kakashi couldn't help the small smile that was turning his lips up. You've been dealing with young children? Tatsumaki glanced up at him, pausing mid-lick, her tongue stuck out of her mouth and covered with white frozen cream. Kakashi tried very hard not to let that affect him. She huffed and pulled the cone away, closing her mouth and swallowing the ice cream. I can't confirm that. She straightened from her slouch against him and rubbed the back of her head with a bit of a blush covering her tanned cheeks. But if I am, they aren't my children and they aren't as young as Hito-chan. Kakashi responded to her smirk with a barking laugh, amused by this amazing woman. Here she was, on a long-term mission, fearing for her personal safety and raising a child conceived of rape, and yet she was so energetic and happy and open. He had invited her out to have some time for a break because she was only about 16 years old and had been working so hard, and he knew that even at 24 he still liked ice cream, so that was what he'd ended up suggesting. So they'd both hugged and kissed Hirohito, mentioned to Mito that they'd return in a bit and went out for said ice cream. Kakashi was relatively sure that he was going to be questioned about his date with the ever-elusive Yamamoto-san when he returned to the daycare, but he didn't really consider this a date. This was more of a get-to-know-you-better moment. Shinobi didn't usually have time to go out in groups of friends and then pair off with the most compatible mate they found, so they'd outlined a few pre-dating activities so that both parties knew what they were actually being vetted for dating. Ice cream wasn't on the list, but coffee was. Kakashi had asked Tatsumaki if she wanted to get coffee, but had been told that the young woman didn't drink coffee. Tatsumaki had been the one to suggest dango, But Kakashi felt that hit-on date, too much so they'd compromised on a nice walk in one of the parks and a cone of ice cream. So, do you have any other children, Tatsumaki-san, or just Hito-chan? Kakashi asked when they'd both been silent for a short while, wanting to know more about the young woman he was starting to really like. Oh please, Tatsumaki waved a hand in the air, you can call me Maki. And no, I only have Hito-chan. Kakashi felt his heart flutter in his chest when he was told he was allowed to call her by a familiar nickname. He hadn't thought that she liked him that much. Only Hito-chan, he repeated, did you have plans for more children in the future? Maki rolled her eyes, yeah, no. I'm far too young to be thinking about having more children right now. Maybe in 8 to 10 years I'll have another child, but Hito is more than enough at my age. She signed then, I always imagined a big family when I was younger though, so I'll most likely want more than 2 altogether. Not really surprised, Kakashi nodded along with her. She'd been raped and impregnated so young that he could understand that she'd want to wait until she was 25 to have more children. That she wanted at least 2 more children was a good sign for him as he himself had plans for 2 to 3 children. 2 of his own and Hito? He mused silently to himself. What do you like to do in your off time, Maki-san? Kakashi asked, curious. She had to have personal pursuits as well as her job and child. Biting her lips, Maki hummed under her breath, I don't know. I like to train. Well, I used to pull pranks all the time, but I've sort of switched those over to shogi and go for the planning and execution of strategy and tactics since Hito-chan. She mused some more, then smiled up at him. I like to read adventure books. I don't like textbooks, and I don't have an opinion of history books, though I like to learn about shinobi history. I've been told that I'm an auditory and kinesthetic learner, not a visual person. I don't do lectures either, but if you tell me something interesting, I'll remember it. Considering that information, Kakashi offered up some information on himself. I like to train as well. I enjoy reading various materials, including textbooks. He gave Maki a sly grin and she chuckled at their differences rather than scoffing. I like to learn every which way possible. But then, I'm a bit smarter than the average person. Really? Maki wasn't questioning his claim, she was trying to quantify it, how much smarter? I became Chunin when I was 6. Kakashi remarked offhandedly. He wasn't bragging and he knew that she understood that. I made Junin when I was 14 and created my first original jutsu then. I could read by the time I was 13 months old and spoke my first word at the age of 7 months. Maki stared at him with wide eyes. Wow. That is totally amazing. You're like a genius. Kakashi was about to respond when Maki continued, not giving him space to talk. I bet you know the most awesome of jutsu if you've been Junin for so long. Could you teach me some? I mean, I've been training with Guy on my taijutsu and I probably don't know half of what I should know to be a battle shinobi, but I wasn't exactly trained that way in the first place. I love sparring. If I could, I would totally be on a front-line team. Hell, I have chakra reserves up to my fucking eyeballs, but apparently I have other talents. Maki trailed off and Kakashi had to fight from reassuring her that he didn't just like the way she looked. He had figured out quickly that she'd been trained primarily in infiltration and seduction straight out of the academy, so obviously she wouldn't know the battle skills that most Chunin had. It almost made him sick to his stomach that Maki had been chosen to learn the seduction arts over her own wishes to be a battle shinobi simply because she was beautiful. And it wasn't a surprise that she'd not use the skills she did know outside of her missions if she hadn't have wanted them in the first place. I'd be more than happy to show you a few jutsu, Maki-san. Kakashi slowly, cautiously, extending his arm and Maki didn't flinch away from him, but wound her own arm around his. Locking their elbows together. Do you have any chakra control exercises? If she wanted to move from the seduction division in Anbu to be a battle shinobi, she'd need to cover pretty much everything from genin training up. Though now it made a lot more sense about her taijutsu. A seductress wouldn't need taijutsu, so all that she would have learned would have been the basic academy taijutsu, being too busy learning a horizontal taijutsu, and the academy had been years ago for Maki. Her quick study was easily be attributed to her dedication and kinesthetic learning ability in his mind. Ah, no? Maki winced and bit her lip. I can't make clones, but I can do body switches, transformations, rope escapes, and the cloaked invisibility. I know most E-rank jutsu and a few Ds. She sounded embarrassed and Kakashi was sure it was because the ones that she had explicitly stated she knew were used mostly by the Anbu Seduction Division after a shinobi had made chunin. Very few battle chunin would use simplistic forms of jutsu. Battle shinobi needed more powerful jutsu to counteract an enemy's powerful jutsu. Seduction shinobi rarely were sent on a mission they couldn't get through using just E-rank jutsu as they mostly dealt with softer, civilian targets. And anything more powerful that Maki knew, she wouldn't be telling him because the Anbu Seduction Division were very secretive about their jutsu. Besides, Kakashi was sure that the more powerful jutsu that she knew would involve a lot less clothing and morals. There was one thing that bothered Kakashi though: you can't make a clone? Yeah, I don't know what's wrong with the stupid things, but they come out looking like they're high on something and then they just explode. Maki shook her head. It's very annoying. Have you tried to make water clones, or even shadow clones? Maki stopped walking, pulling Kakashi to a halt by their still connected arms. Excuse me? Listen, oh great one, I can't make regular clones. What makes you think I'll be able to make elemental clones? She frowned, and what the hell is a shadow clone? A smile played on Kakashi's lips. Well, you did mention that you have a lot of chakra. It's possible that you're overloading your clone, causing them to look weird and then explode. Shadow clones have so much chakra in them that they're solid clones that can take a pretty serious hit before dispersing. It took a moment, but then Maki snorted, you suck. Totally. Kakashi cocked his head in silent question and Maki explained herself. I spent years in the academy, not being able to do a clone, and here you are. You listened to my explanation of what happens and poof. You have an answer. If only you'd hung out around the school. Ah, Kakashi mocked her lightly, but then I could have been mistaken for a stalker. I mean, I'm 10 years older than you. Do you really think you wanted an 18 to 20-year-old stalking you when you were in the academy? That surely would have affected your ability to concentrate. Maki laughed with him, sing-songingly mocking as well, but I would have been able to do the clone. They continued laughing together for a bit as they finished their cones. A sudden thought occurred to Kakashi and he looked down to the woman who was contently hanging onto his arm, looking around the park with interest. So, you haven't asked to see my face, he commented lightly. He'd never before meet someone who hadn't asked within the first 2 days of knowing him. Maki had known him as one of her child's guardians for almost 5 weeks and now they'd just spent about an hour together and she still hadn't asked, or even looked closely at his face. Maki didn't even look away from where she was watching some of the upcoming graduating class of the academy play/train, racing through the trees, a game of capture the flag at its finest. Don't really care what you look like, she muttered, her emotions dipping for some reason. At least you like me and invite me out to do stuff. Warmth filled Kakashi and he stared at Maki with wonder. She liked him. She didn't care if he was handsome or cute or scarred, or that he looked like his father, she just liked him. For him, it was a novel experience for Kakashi. All the enemies Kakashi had, he had because of his reputation. Everyone he considered a friend, even Guy, had wanted to know him in the beginning because of what he was, instead of who he was. Maki liked him for who he was. As they made their way back to the daycare, Kakashi could feel his heart beating heavily with something. Maki liked him. They were met by Hito clinging to the gates of the daycare fence. When the toddler spotted his mother he yelled and clapped with excitement. Kakashi realized that Hito was used to getting picked up generally around 5 and that by asking Maki to spend time with him instead of her son, he was asking her to choose between him and her son. He wouldn't do that again. Next time it would be planned. Next time Hito could come as well. He didn't want to separate Maki from Hito. Hello, darling. Maki cuddled Hito to herself, petting his hair and kissing his cheeks and nose. Hito kissed her back enthusiastically, his tiny hands cupping her ears. Both of them giggled and Kakashi couldn't help but smile at the sight of them. Hito was practically a male clone of Maki and seeing them together was adorable. Tashi-chan. Hito turned from his mother to Kakashi and reached out with both hands towards the Junin, leaning away from Maki and making her support his body so that he didn't fall. Maki laughed at Hito's antics and nodded for Kakashi to take the boy. Why, hello there, Hito-chan. Kakashi bussed Hito's forehead and the toddler, to Kakashi's surprise, reached for his own neck and fumbled for a moment before lifting his orange shirt up and pulling it over his nose before pressing his covered mouth to Kakashi's chin and making kissing noises. Ah, Maki cooed at them, her hands pressed up against her chin. You guys are so adorable. A blush made its way over Kakashi's cheeks, thankfully hidden by his mask, and he cuddled Hito to his chest. What a strange feeling he had in his chest. He wasn't sure what it was, but he'd figure it out. All he knew right now was that he didn't want to give Hito back to Maki so that they could go home. Maki laughed again, this time at his embarrassed silence, and she stepped into his personal space to collect Hito from him. She had to pry the child off of him, but Kakashi wasn't really against the hold Hito had on his vest. Okay Hito-chan, you have to let Kakashi go now, so you can go home, Kakashi told Hito gently as he helped Maki disengage her son from him, and they chuckled at his grasping hands. Hito not wanting to let go of Kakashi at all. Once Hito was safely in Maki's arms, Kakashi paused for a moment, then leaned down and kissed the top of Hito's head, and Maki's, before backing away. Have a safe trip home, he said quietly. Maki smiled at him softly and nodded, you too, Kakashi. And then she turned and left with Hito hanging himself over her shoulder, waving goodbye frantically to the Junin. Someone poked his side and Kakashi was surprised to realize that someone had snuck up on him. So you're dating Yamamoto-san? Akamichi Mito cooed, she's been alone for so long. I think you'll do each other well. Kakashi lifted a hand, backing away, not dating, Mito-san. We just went for a walk. Mito eyeballed him, you had ice cream, she said it like it was hard evidence of something, and Hito-chan likes you too. Mito-san, Kakashi started only to be interrupted. Of course, Hito-chan likes everyone, but he never emulates anyone but his mother. That means that he wants to be like you, Mito told him sternly, and that means that you have to step up and be a man. Of course, Mito-san, Kakashi bowed his head to her and flickered away, hoping to get away without her following him. He couldn't help but think about what she had told him though. It wasn't exactly ego-boosting to have a child emulate him, but there was something that made him feel giddy to know that Maki's son liked him enough to treat him like family. He wondered what Maki thought of her son copying him. He hoped she was okay with it. Anko stared. Hito stared back. Anko leaned in a little, raising an eyebrow. Hito blinked innocently. Fine, you win. Anko threw up her arms and slumped back in her seat, pushing the last ball of dango over to the kid. If there was one thing she liked about babysitting, it was that she could fill the kid up with candy and sugar and send him home. Guy watched them in loud amusement. I see that Tatsumaki-san has allowed you to watch over her son for her. The man bounced on the balls of his feet and Hito turned to stare at him. Guy gave the baby a huge grin and Hito giggled, reaching out for the shiny teeth that had caught his attention. Kids just like his mom. Gods, always distracted by shiny stuff. Anko pulled a senbon from her weapons pouch and waved it in front of Hito's face. Hito's eyes latched onto it immediately. So what are you doing here, Guy-san? I was only just on my way home from an extensive taijutsu practice with my youthful genin team when I saw you and Hito-chan having a glorious moment of rest, and I just had to come over and youthfully greet you on this beautiful day. Also, I am curiously wondering where Tatsumaki-chan and Kakashi-san are, as they usually have Hito-chan with them when it is after 5 o'clock. Anko kept one eye on the boy as she spoke with Guy. Tatsumaki-chan said something about a date and Kakashi was trying to get her to let Hito-chan come with them, but Tatsumaki insisted that Hito didn't have to go with them every single time. Oh? Guy blinked. How long has my eternal rival been dating Tatsumaki-chan? Hito grabbed the dancing senbon from Anko's hands and plopped himself down on the counter of the dango store, happily playing with it. Anko was mildly concerned until she remembered that Hito was Tatsumaki and Kakashi's son. She was sure that both of his parents had taught him not to play with sharp objects. Obviously he was keeping his hands away from the ends of the senbon. She cooed at the pretty, weapons-entranced baby before turning back to Guy. I don't know, but you know that Hito is Kakashi's, right? Guy blinked at the Tokubetsu Junin for a moment before he leaned in and spoke in the quietest voice she'd ever heard from the man. You have realized that Tatsumaki-chan was only just 14 when she became pregnant, correct? Oh, Pshaw. Anko waved her hand at the green beast of Konoha. Obviously I know that. I was the one that figured out how she got pregnant. I meant that Kakashi's in love with Tatsumaki-chan and he wants to adopt Hito when they get married. There was almost an audible snap when Guy straightened in a startled movement. They're to be gloriously wed? Anko nodded, checking on Hito only to see that he was perfectly fine. Well, the baby was fine. The senbon had managed to find its way to the back wall of the dango hut, pinning one of the cook's large white hats to the wall. Hito was clapping and pointing enthusiastically, and Anko was sure that even if Kakashi wasn't the biological father, Hito still took after him. Who else but Kakashi's kid would have such aim, so young after all? I dunno if Kakashi's asked her yet, but he will. He's head over heels. Hey, whoa there, darlin'. A fellow Tokubetsu Junin stopped walking past them and hurried back. Did you just say that Hitaki Kakashi is in love? Anko gave Hito another senbon, this time watching him to see how he threw it. Yeah, Genma, I said Kakashi is in love. Genma leaned on the counter, looking at her and Guy intently. With who? He sounded vaguely incredulous, and Anko laughed when Hito threw his second senbon and hit the hat that was pinned to the wall again. The toddler turned to Anko and held out his hand. Another one, please Anko ba-chan. Genma looked to the toddler in surprise and then did a double take. Hito reached for the senbon that was in his mouth, shiny. Whoa there, little guy. Genma leaned his head back, rolling the senbon to the other side of his mouth, out of reach, and Hito crossed his arms, pouting. So, Anko-san. Whose kid? Anko laughed a little evilly. This is Yamamoto Hirohito. Genma gave her a blank look. Tatsumaki's kid. The girl that Kakashi is in love with. Genma looked from the toddler to the wall with the two senbon in it to the toddler again. Kakashi-san's aim? His or Tatsumaki-chan's? Anko shrugged. Not that she was very good to start with, but Tatsumaki-chan is a quick study. And I have yet to see Kakashi not learn something on the first try. Wait, Genma settled in a free seat. Hirohito-chan is Kakashi's kid too? Anko smirked. Well, she looked at Guy. They are going to get married once Kakashi gets up the balls to ask her. I mean, she loves him too, you know? I don't think he's realized that he loves her back though. So, Genma blinked, trying to reconcile this news. Kakashi-san is in love. He has a son. He's going to ask the mother of his child to marry him once he gets his head out of his ass. Yes, and yes, Anko purred. She would relish the rumor mill having something to talk about in regards to Kakashi. It would probably be the first time that anyone would have the gumption to gossip about the genius, but with rumors like she was putting out, no one would be able to resist. A knock on his door startled him, and Kakashi rolled off his bed, leaving his bedroom and heading down the hall towards his front door. When he opened the door, he was shocked. Maki-san? Hito-chan? What are you doing here? Maki pursed her lips, adjusting the bag over her shoulder, her hair mussed and her face pinched. You, once offered up your place if I ever needed somewhere to go? She sounded far more apprehensive than Kakashi had ever heard her before. Of course, he opened the door wider and let her inside, checking the hall behind her as he closed the door. He was only a little relieved that no one seemed to be paying attention to the beautiful mother knocking on his door. Thank you. Maki let the child down, who then toddled off to the living room and straightened up with a huff. I didn't want to intrude, but I only need a place to sleep for one night. What happened? Kakashi took the bag from her and showed her where she could put her sandals and hang her light coat. She was wearing a rather endearing shirt that proclaimed her the best mother in the world under her coat, and Kakashi hid his amusement, worried about why she was at his place. They were only just moving from pre-dates to actual dates, and he wasn't entirely sure what was going on. Rolling her eyes, Maki sniffed a little haughtily. They're fumigating my apartment building, but they never bothered to inform me, so I was packed up and kicked out just half an hour ago. I can't afford a hotel room for a week, but I can for 5 days, so I figure that I can stay with you tonight, get a hotel tomorrow, and then for the last night Hito can stay at the daycare and I'll do something. She finally shrugged. Kakashi smiled. Then, you know, he said as he showed her around his small apartment, the kitchen, living room, 2 bedrooms and bathroom. You don't have to go to a hotel, Maki. You can crash here all week if you need a place to stay. He didn't really want her doing something on the last night that she didn't have plans for. Whether she was sleeping in a tree or in someone's bed that she conned herself into, he didn't want her to have to do it. I don't want to intrude, Maki sighed as she settled on his couch with him, watching her son. I'm sure you weren't expecting 2 totally uninvited guests for one night, never mind a week. It's not a problem. Kakashi was about to push it until his brain actually kicked into gear and he remembered that she'd had bad experiences with men and he didn't want to make her uncomfortable. Hito toddled over to his bookshelf and Kakashi looked to Maki. Can he read? It wasn't as stupid a question as most would think because he had been able to read when he was 2. Not yet. Maki smiled softly at the golden boy as he pulled out the brightly colored books, but if you have the Icha Icha special editions with pictures and let him open them up, I'll hurt you. Kakashi sighed in relief and sat back, a bit more comfortable. He smiled broadly. I keep those editions in my room, he told Maki with humor and she chuckled. Yeah, I was pretty sure you'd have the illustrated copy. She looked at him slyly out of the corner of her eyes. You seem childish like that. Kakashi couldn't withhold a burst of laughter that didn't even startle Hito as he continued to pull books from the shelves. Maki laughed with him and they settled down. A feeling of contentment bubbled up inside and Kakashi had to push it aside because he didn't want to act outside of what Maki's expectations of him were. They were at a fragile place in their relationship and Kakashi wasn't sure where Maki wanted to go with it. Would you like some tea? He asked quietly, gesturing to the kitchen. I have peppermint and sencha green. Maki sighed, tired. Peppermint would be nice. Does it have a lot of caffeine? Caffeine-free, Kakashi said over his shoulder as he pulled the old tea kettle from the cupboard and filled it. I usually have tea before bed and I certainly don't need something with caffeine after a hard day. He might have to go out and buy a proper tea set if Maki liked to have tea often. It didn't feel right to make Maki drink tea out of his old kettle and a battered coffee cup. So true, Maki moaned and stretched out on the couch. Kakashi set the water to boil and leaned back against the counter, just watching her. Hito toddled across the floor and pulled himself up onto the couch, crawling over his mother and settling between her and the back of the couch under her arm. Absently he smiled, his eyes softening. You seem tired. Did you have a bad day today? Oh, nothing too bad. Just stuff, she whispered as she waved her hand in the air. I mean, I have less than a month left, barring problems. I'll be doing regular missions after that. Kakashi couldn't hold back a sigh of relief and Maki looked over to him curiously, careful not to wake the child sleeping on her. Kakashi just nodded to her. It's good that you'll be able to stop and get to do real missions. He went over what he said and then checked himself. Not that what you're doing right now isn't a real mission, but I mean that you said you wanted to be on the front line. After your long-term mission is over you should be able to do whatever you want, right? The Anbu-yu usually only had people spend 2 to 4 years with them because of the high breakdown percentage after 4 years on the job. To know that Maki was almost done her time with Anbu-yu was good. Excellent, even. It created a feeling in him that he didn't know how to classify. I hope so, Maki nodded. The water began to boil and Kakashi turned back to grab 2 cups and 2 peppermint tea bags. Cream or sweetener? He asked over his shoulder as he dumped a teaspoon of honey into his own mug. Maki murmured a negative to both so he collected the mugs and made his way back to the living room. She sat up carefully, making sure that Hito didn't wake and took her cup, blowing over the top before taking the tiniest sip. She smiled over the rim of the mug and Kakashi couldn't help but smile back. So, you don't have any family in Konoha? Kakashi opened the conversation, hoping for a little more information about Maki. Since she had to resort to staying at a friend's place, he was assuming that she didn't have any family, but wanted confirmation. No, she sipped at her tea. I'm an orphan. She stopped and bit her lip. At least, I hope I am. Kakashi was confused and she could obviously see the question in his gray eye. Well see, I was found after the Kyuubi attack and sent to an orphanage. I wasn't claimed or even looked for, that I know of. I'd rather have dead parents than deadbeat ones. She shrugged, pretty brutal, I know, but, she shrugged again, that's just the way I feel. She would have been about 4 during the attack, Kakashi realized. You don't remember anything from before? No, she shook her head, they even gave me a birthday of October 10th because that's when they got me. Kakashi winced, that must have been hard, having a birthday then? It certainly isn't a picnic, she snarked, at least Hirohito was born in the summer. When is Hito's birthday? Kakashi leaned back in his chair, watching Maki pet Hito's gold hair gently. The young woman smiled softly at her son. 4 weeks. Almost to the day 25th of June. He'll be 2. Curiosity, and the fact that Maki was answering his questions, drew Kakashi out to ask another question about something that he thought odd. So, his name. Kakashi smirked. Pretty epic? Maki chucked under her breath. I like epic. She smirked back and Kakashi rolled his eyes a little. Besides, you only get to name a child once. I thought I'd go all out. What were your other choices? Maki blushed suddenly and Kakashi perked up. This ought to be good. I had thought about Hiruzen after the Sandame, or Hashirama for the Shodan. Her blush deepened, and I don't know why I'm telling you this, but I had thought about Tsukumo as well. Kakashi coughed, startled. It felt like Guy had punched him in the face unexpectedly. Tsukumo? Yeah, I told you that I like learning shinobi history as long as it's not from textbooks, and I heard your father's story when I was younger from someone who had known him. I think Hitaki Tsukumo was a great man. I would have been proud to name my son Tsukumo. Still stunned, Kakashi studied Maki and Hito for a bit. Maki fidgeted under his gaze, but didn't look away. Finally, Kakashi nodded. I think he would have liked that. His father had been doing what he thought was right after all. And since Obito's death, Kakashi had a new appreciation for his father's sacrifices. Maki graced him with a thankful smile, glad that he wasn't mad at her, and Kakashi turned his attention to his tea, unsure of how to react in the settling awkwardness. They were silent for a time, and then Hito half woke up, crawling into Maki's lap. Maki cuddled the boy close. It's late, she whispered to Kakashi, though she didn't look away from Hito. I should go to bed. I have work tomorrow. Of course. Kakashi stood and held out a hand. Maki stared at it for a moment before taking it and letting him help her to her feet. I'll get the extra futon out of the closet for Hito-chan. Maki nodded and disappeared into the bathroom with her bag and son to get ready for bed. Kakashi set the futon up beside the guest bed. If either of his beds had been a double, he would have let Maki have that one, since she would have been able to sleep with her son right beside her, but unfortunately both his bed and his guest bed were singles. Kakashi figured that Maki would rather her son be on the futon to stay closer to the floor so he didn't roll off it and hurt himself. There was a shuffle by the door and Kakashi looked up from where he was tucking in the ends of the sheet. The sight of Maki standing in the doorway wearing what he guessed to be only a long t-shirt and a pair of panties while holding her son in his PJs practically stopped his brain. He would have reacted if he hadn't had a lot of experience keeping his mind in a tight situation. I changed the sheets and got an extra blanket for both of you. I apologize, but sometimes it gets cold in the apartment at night. Thank you, Maki murmured, watching him like a hawk. He stood and went to the edge of the room. Maki blinked and shook herself before entering the room, carefully leaving lots of space between them as she settled Hito under the covers of the futon and kissing his forehead. She turned to look at him as he walked calmly to the door and stepped outside of the room. Have a good night, Maki-chan, Kakashi said softly before closing the door in his own face and going to his room. He closed his own door and spun, slumping against the door and looking up at the ceiling, biting his lip. Oh dear gods, what are you doing to me? He muttered before shaking the feeling off and changing into a pair of sweats and going to bed himself. He debated for a moment of sleeping with his mask on, nothing he hadn't done before on missions, before shaking his head and taking the material off his face. He was at home, he didn't need to hide. And if Maki or Hito saw his face in the morning, he was strangely okay with that. Whimpers from Maki's room woke him in the middle of the night. Maki and Hito had been sleeping in his apartment for 5 days now, and Kakashi had gotten used to midnight toddler wake-ups, but the whimpers he could hear now weren't Hito's. They were coming from Maki. Moving carefully, Kakashi made his way to Maki's door and knocked lightly enough that Maki should hear it, but that it wouldn't wake Hito. No, please Maki's voice was low and pain-filled, and Kakashi couldn't stop himself from opening the door to look in on the young woman. Maki-chan? He called softly, hoping not startle or scare her. She moaned in pain again and tossed on the bed, half fighting an invisible foe in her sleep. No. Kakashi quickly stepped around Hito's futon and sat on the edge of the bed. Maki, he whispered, Maki, it's just a dream. Wake up, it's okay. As he talked to her, he reached out and took one of her half-flailing hands. Maki woke suddenly, flinging herself away from Kakashi, blue eyes wide in terror and a scream on her lips. She managed to choke the scream off, and huddled against the wall, teeth clamped into her fist and tears pouring down her cheeks as her chest heaved in an attempt to breathe. Keeping himself very still, Kakashi waited for Maki to calm enough to realize that he wasn't following her. When the sheer terror left her eyes and she was able to look away from his dark figure to search the rest of the room for any other danger, Kakashi allowed himself to relax a little. Maki? However much her would have liked to add Chan to her name like he had been for the past few days, Kakashi knew that he couldn't. Do you know where you are? She looked back to him wildly, her entire body shivering and jerking as though she were keeping herself from running. No? She finally whispered, blinking frantically. Kakashi felt his heart clench and he opened his mouth to tell her where she was when she shook her head and spoke again, yes. Kakashi? She sounded confused and scared, but calming. Relief flooded through Kakashi as he responded, yes, I'm Kakashi. You know that you're at my apartment? Hi? She painfully started to untense, her limbs slowly stretching out from her huddled fetal position. I had to go somewhere because they did something to my building. As she recounted to herself how she had ended up in a man's house, Kakashi watched her with a concerned eye. Her reaction to her dream, her nightmare, and her reaction to him was extreme. He wondered with horror just what kind of long-term seduction mission she was on. Was the mark abusive? Had she been raped more than once? Had she been raped outside of her mission? Why hadn't the Corps made sure she could deal with this kind of stuff? Or, maybe she needed to be like this for the mission. That was a horrible thought and he pushed it from his mind, refusing to think that again. Konoha wasn't like that. He wondered just how much longer she could do what she was doing. She only had 3 weeks left, and wasn't that odd that her mission would end on her son's birthday. But she'd been doing this, whatever it was, for 5 years already. How are you feeling? Kakashi asked softly, hoping that she had calmed significantly. She blinked several times and came away from the wall slowly, better. She paused, giving him a grimacing smile. I apologize for waking you up, Kakashi, I didn't mean to. It's all right. Kakashi gently rested his hand on the covers of the bed, palm up. Maki stared at it for a long moment before cautiously resting her small hand in his. Can you tell me what you dreamt of? She blanched and glanced quickly to her son before looking back at him, lips pursed. A bad experience, she muttered, curling her knees up to her chest, wrapping her free hand around her legs, hugging them close. Kakashi nodded, sympathetic with understanding as she rested her head on her knees and stared at him. I understand. He did. He understood that she's had a nightmare about her assault, that she'd had a nightmare about being powerless and unable to escape. That was one of the reasons that even though her hand was in his, he hadn't closed his fingers around her hand in a trapping movement. He wanted to her know that he would never trap or control her. She slowly withdrew her hand in his and though the action made his heart heavy, he didn't stop her. Is Hito-chan still asleep? She whispered softly and Kakashi checked over his shoulder to the toddler still sleeping peacefully. Yes, he's fine. When he turned back to Maki, she had already crawled under the bed's covers, pulling the blanket to her chin, holding the edges of the duvet in a hold so tight that her fingers were a little white. Would you like me to go? He asked gently, not wanted to scare her more than he already had. Maki hunched her shoulders under the blanket and then nodded, shame in her eyes, please? Of course. Kakashi leaned away and when he stood up, he took a simultaneous step away from the bed, knowing that Maki would be more comfortable if he wasn't looming over her. If you need anything, I'll be in my room, okay? Nodding miserably, Maki managed a short wave to him before he closed the door behind him. As he settled back into bed, knowing for a fact that he wouldn't be able to go back to sleep but not feeling like reading or staring at the wall for a few hours before the sun dawned, Kakashi realized something important. His hand reached up and brushed across his jaw, feeling a light stubble. He hadn't been wearing his mask. Maki had seen him without his mask, or hite-ite. No wonder she hadn't recognized him for a moment. Well, that was one more thing that he didn't have to worry about then, Maki seeing his face. A clatter of dishes woke him and Kakashi blinked sleep out of his eyes. He stared at the ceiling in shock that he'd fallen asleep after Maki's nightmare. He had been sure that he wouldn't be able to sleep after going back to bed, but the fact that he'd just woken up had belied that. Kakashi, Maki's voice called through the apartment, breakfast is almost ready. Get your lazy ass out of bed. Kakashi wasn't sure whether to be relieved or not that Maki was so lively and happy sounding this morning. Coming. He called back, shifting the blankets off and settling his bare feet on the floor. He was worried that Maki was pushing the trauma away in the light of day, but she was always so alive that he wasn't sure if the nightmare had been a one-off because she'd been sleeping in his apartment for so long or something that she regularly dealt with. As he was about to strip his t-shirt off, his bedroom door was pushed open cautiously and Hito poked his head inside. "Tashi-chan?" Kakashi couldn't help but smile at Hito, no matter how conflicted he felt at the moment. "Good morning, Hito-chan." He dropped the edges of his shirt back down over his stomach, thinking that the best course of action would be to just go about his morning in his t-shirt and sweatpants until his company had left for the day. "Tashi-chan." Hito pushed the door the rest of the way open and toddled his way to the bed, clinging tight to Kakashi's legs. He started to babble wildly and Kakashi's smile widened. He stood up and swung Hito into his arms, settling the boy on his hip. Hito continued to babble at him as he gave himself a discreet sniff and decided that he was okay to eat before having a shower. Maki looked up from where she was setting the small table and Kakashi smiled at her softly, his left eye uncovered but closed. She smiled back and went back to what she had been doing without a single pause to study his uncovered face. "So, ready for the weekend, Kakashi?" she asked brightly, going to the oven and pulling it open. The smell of apples and cinnamon filled the air and Kakashi took an appreciative sniff of the air. "Most definitely." "Is that apple coffee cake?" he asked as he set Hito in the baby seat that Maki had clamped to the table. With a bright laugh, Maki nodded. "It is. I know that you like apples and I wanted to make something special this morning." She set the dish on the hot pad on the table and Kakashi leaned over to look at the golden brown breakfast cake with a wide eye. "Gods, that smells delicious." Their breakfast was loud and full of laughter. Kakashi volunteered to do the dishes since Maki had made the food, and so while he did that, Maki cleaned both herself and her son up, getting ready for the day. Kakashi was lounging against the counter with a steaming cup of coffee in hand when Maki emerged from the hall, Hito in tow. She was wearing a pair of bright blue khaki pants and a white tank top with brilliant orange stripes on it. Hito was dressed in orange pants and a blue shirt, as well as a small blue scarf around his neck. Hito caught sight of Kakashi and giggled, pulling free of his mother's hold and running to Kakashi. He careened into Kakashi's legs and the Junin crouched to steady him. Hito giggled again and pulled at the scarf at his neck, thrusting it up over his face and covering his nose. Maki laughed at the humorous look Kakashi graced her with. "Ma, so you want to be like me?" Kakashi asked the little boy and Hito nodded, his blue-covered cheeks pushing his eyes closed with his wide smile. "Well, I don't think I mind, and given that your mother is the one that gave you this," Kakashi stroked Hito's cheek gently, indicating the scarf even as he adjusted it so that it matched the way his own rested on his face. "I don't think she minds either." There was a particular feeling fluttering in his stomach and he'd felt it before, but he still hadn't figured out exactly what it meant so far. Hito babbled some more before Maki stepped forward and Kakashi passed the toddler back. They shared a look, though it was more like an eye roll, when Hito bawled loudly for a moment before quickly getting over being taken from his favorite silver-haired nen. "When will you get back?" Kakashi asked with contentment in his body language and voice as Maki slipped on a pair of blue nondescript ninja sandals. "After lunch, I think." Maki swept her ruffled bangs from her eyes. "I was going to take Hito to the park and then I thought we could have lunch with Kurenai. She likes to play with Hito." Maki smirked. "I think she wants a kid of her own, actually. Anyway, so after lunch I'm going to do a little shopping, mostly grocery to replenish your stores." Kakashi looked over his shoulder when she paused, eyeballing his kitchen. He had no doubt that he had very few food items left since he'd been feeding 3 people instead of 1 for a week. "Exactly," she laughed when he redirected his gaze to her. "I'll come home after that." "Sounds like a good plan." Kakashi followed her to the door and waved goodbye to her as she bounced down the hall, waving back over her shoulder. The moment she had vanished down the stairs, Kakashi felt a presence beside him and he slipped a genjutsu mask over his face before turning to see Sarutobi Asuma, one of his fellow Junin, staring at him in shock. "Asuma?" he asked, wondering what was wrong. Was that kid wearing your mask?" Asuma asked, blinking slowly. Kakashi raised an eyebrow. "He was wearing a mask, yes." "Oh my gods." Asuma's blinking sped up. I hadn't realized that you'd procreated already." The broader and taller man reached into his pocket and pulled out his pack of cigarettes, though she looked pretty young, Kakashi. It took a moment for Kakashi to break through his confusion and disbelief. Hito-chan isn't mine, Asuma. And Maki-chan is. How was he supposed to explain his complicated relationship with Maki to Asuma when he didn't even know how to explain it to himself? Asuma cocked his head, lighting the cigarette. Maki-chan is. Kakashi snarled and then stopped, stepping back a bit. Asuma stared incredulously at him, cigarette hanging limply off his lips. Did you just growl at me? Sorry, Her name is Tatsumaki. Don't call her Chan. Kakashi ran a hand through his mussed hair, leaning against the doorframe. Damn it. There was a laugh and Kakashi shot a questioning glance to the Sarutobi. Asuma smirked widely. You got it bad, don't you? I enjoy her company. Kakashi drawled out, unsure of where this was going. And if you saw her with another man? Killing intent rose, sudden and unbidden. I'd rip him apart. Kakashi snarled again, thinking of the nightmare that Maki had suffered through just last night. Thinking of how scared she had been of a man even being in the same room with her. Asuma backed up, lifting his hands defensively. Whoa, calm down, Kakashi, I wasn't about to make a move on your woman. Rational thought reinserted itself in Kakashi's mind and he bowed his head. It's complicated, he finally told Asuma, feeling weary without a reason. It felt very strange. Asuma frowned heavily and gestured to Kakashi's door. You want to talk about it? I won't betray her confidences, Kakashi warned the bearded man, leading him into his apartment. Asuma nodded, slipping his sandals off at the door. Here, Kakashi passed the other man a cup of coffee. Maki-chan made too much for me to drink this morning. She doesn't like coffee. Taking the cup, Asuma sat down at the table and stared at the chair with the booster seat attached to it with open curiosity. So, how long have you known them? I met Hito-chan first, about 6 months ago. He stays at the daycare when Maki-chan is on her mission. Single mom, Asuma murmured to himself, and you noticed Hito out of all the other babies there? Kakashi chuckled, rubbing his face. Hito managed to escape Akamichi Mito's toddler pen. You know the one, with the baby-proof jutsu on it? Asuma rolled his eyes. Yeah, I know that one. And the kid got out? 6 times in an hour, Kakashi muttered. I stood there and watched the little guy do it again and again after he found me the first time. So you're saying that Hito managed to escape the pen 6 times in a row? The same pen that adjusts itself so that all previous methods of escape are closed off? And that he found you? Asuma shook his head in disbelief. Were you hiding? Kakashi shrugged. I wasn't exactly standing out the first time. The copy nin shrugged. It was a couple weeks later when I was actually there when Maki-chan came to pick him up. He laughed at himself. I mistook her for Hito's sister, even though Hito called her Ka-chan. Asuma's gaze on him sharpened. Yeah, I know. Never underestimate children. I just couldn't believe that she was old enough to be his mother. How old is she? Asuma asked, his voice rather quiet. Oh, she's turning 17 in October. Hito will be 2 in just over 2 weeks. Why is she living here? Well, I asked her on a few prees, and I think we've moved from prees to actual dates and I offhandedly offered my apartment as a place she could stay if she ever needed it. Her apartment building is being fumigated this week and they didn't give her any notice, the bastards. Wow, Asuma broke Kakashi's words off. You really like her. I just said that. Kakashi frowned. Asuma took a close look at Kakashi and then his lips twisted up in a stunned smile. Holy shit. What? Kakashi was cautiously curious about what Asuma was thinking and Asuma waved his question off. Oh, no, this? You need to figure this out on your own. Asuma laughed to himself and stood up. It's good that you like Hito-chan too. He mentioned over his shoulder and he put his sandals back on and left Kakashi's apartment. Kakashi stared at the door in confusion before shaking himself out of it and dropping the genjutsu mask. He needed a shower and then he could get dressed and put a real mask on. He didn't feel comfortable without the material rubbing against his face and neck. He would rather not be taking a genin team when his personal life was just starting to come together. He didn't want to watch over 3 completely immature brats as he tried to give them the skills to survive as a shinobi. Taking a genin team also meant that he would have to cut down on the hours he spent volunteering at the daycare. Although, he shouldn't worry about it just yet because the Sandame had been trying to get him to take a genin team for 7 years now and he'd never passed any of them. There was a difference with this team though. Uchiha, Uzumaki, 2 children he didn't want under someone else's watch because he couldn't be sure that someone else would be able to give those 2 children what they needed. The moment he poked his head through the door and the blackboard eraser fell on his head, which he was indeed expecting given the door was parted the exact width of an eraser, he decided that he wasn't impressed, even though he didn't want to give them up. He looked over the two 13-year-olds and the one 12-year-old. Uchiha Sasuke. Black hair, black eyes, hands folded under his chin in a controlled manner. Haruno Sakura. Pink hair, green eyes, shivering in terror at him that he hasn't earned yet. Uzumaki Naruto. Blonde hair, blue eyes, laughing. But only for a moment. The second they locked eyes, Uzumaki stopped laughing and Kakashi's mind was drawn to the woman he's dating. They looked like siblings. His mind stuttered to a halt. Could Maki-chan be his sensei's daughter like Uzumaki was his son? Were they half-siblings? Gods, but Hito looked exactly like Minato and Uzumaki. He told them to meet him on the roof and flickered away, stunned at how Uzumaki had looked at him, had seemed to see past all of his masks. He told them to introduce themselves. Haruno asked how to go about doing that. He thought that she wasn't as smart as she was lauded to be. But he couldn't tell them that he liked Maki-chan and Hito-chan. He couldn't tell them that he didn't like Anbu-yu for what they'd done to Maki. He couldn't tell them that his dream for the future was to keep Maki-chan by his side and help raise Hito-chan and maybe his own children. He couldn't tell them that his hobbies were dating Maki-chan and reading porn. They aren't old enough to know any of that and he wasn't about to give out that much personal information at their first meeting. Besides, Uzumaki still looked like Maki-chan. And it pained him to see that Uzumaki even moved like her. They had to be related. Had to. There was only 4 years between them. It was possible that his sensei had a child before getting together with Uzumaki Kushina. Naruto's voice was so similar as well. What he imagined Maki might have sounded like 4 years ago. He quickly found out that Uchiha wanted to kill his only remaining family, that Haruno wanted to give Uchiha a family and that Uzumaki liked ramen. How strange it was for him to hear an introduction that didn't have any personal information in it. Uzumaki was almost as good as he was as disseminating attention. He told them that there would be a secondary test and told them not to eat anything and then he flickered away. He couldn't really stand to be around Uzumaki when he so clearly reminded him of Maki-chan. He was allowed to pick Hito up from the daycare, having never been taken off Hito's file as the emergency contact, and he waited for Maki to join him near the ice cream stand where they'd first started to get to know each other. She had told him that it was her last day, that she would be doing regular missions after today. And it was Hito-chan's birthday. Kakashi. Maki bounded down the road, waving at him and Hito with vigor. I'm done. I did it. I got it. She stopped beside Kakashi and huffed, her cheeks red and her hair fly away. Well, there's one more thing for me to do tomorrow, but after that, I'll totally have escaped forever and ever and ever. She pulled Hito from Kakashi's arms gently and spun in a circle, laughing loudly. Congratulations, Maki-chan. Kakashi smiled at her, happy that she was happy. He wasn't sure how to take the news of one more thing, but if Maki wasn't too worried about it, he'd try not to be either. Okay. Maki settled Hito on her hip and threaded an arm around Kakashi's waist, surprising him with her invasion into his personal space. So, we have a birthday party for Hito-chan tonight, Hito smiled and babbled, like he'd been doing for some time. Kakashi had heard Hito use actual words before and therefore knew that the kid knew most of the words he wanted to say, but neither shinobi had insisted that he speak properly. There would be time to get around to that. Hito was only 2 after all. Kakashi and Maki had agreed that he was just being lazy about pronunciation and they were okay with that. Maki had already told him that she found it amusing that her son was hyper and lazy at the same time. Yep, he agreed with his girlfriend and hugged her just a little, relaxing immediately so that she didn't feel trapped to his side. It's good that you had a good day. Maki smiled up at him. I think so too. What about you? There was something in her voice that indicated that she had some idea of what he'd done during the day and it made him curious. Though he'd already mentioned that he was testing a genin team that morning, so he couldn't really say what she knew and didn't know about what he'd done. It was a good day. I told the kids to meet me at Training Ground 7, the one with the red bridge? Maki nodded, gesturing for him to continue, told them not to eat anything and that there is a 66% failure rate. Trying to scare them? Maki smirked at him and Kakashi smirked back. Exactly. So what do you think of your genin? She asked him, curious. Kakashi shrugged a shoulder. Well, the Uchiha is a little black ball of hate, the Haruno is a pretty dedicated fangirl and the Uzumaki. He trailed off and looked down at Maki. Maki looked back up at him, eyes wide as she took in everything he was saying. It was nice to know that she wanted to hear how his day went and who he met and what he thought of them. The Uzumaki? She prodded and Kakashi nodded. Right, the Uzumaki. Maki-chan, do you still not remember anything before the Kyuubi attack? She shook her head and there wasn't a single lie in her blue eyes, not a thing. What's wrong, Kakashi? Hito-chan looks just like Uzumaki. And Uzumaki looks just like you. Kakashi sighed, hell, he moves like you do sometimes. It's a little strange to watch him because pretty much everything he does reminds me of you. Maki pursed her lips, what do you think? She wasn't asking about what he thought about the similarities that he'd noticed, she was asking about what theories he had to explain the similarities. Kakashi smiled and shrugged, maybe you're related. He hadn't wanted to toss that out so quickly, but since she was usually just as blunt as he was being, he figured she could handle it. You might have the same parents, or shared one parent. Uzumaki's parents died during the Kyuubi attack, so it's possible that's why you were never looked for. He wasn't lying either. If she'd been kept secret by Minato, then no one would have looked for her. Oh, she murmured to herself, absently kissing Hito's gleaming locks. So, Kakashi picked up the conversation, do you want to know how I'm going to be testing them? Maki's eyes sparkled but she shook her head, no, I don't think so. I'm sure you'll tell me afterwards, right? Sure. Kakashi nodded with her as they continued down the walking path to Kakashi's apartment. They would just have enough time to get cleaned up and ready to go to Hito's party which was taking place at the daycare. There were several families invited to come, as well as a few of Kakashi and Maki's friends. It was a good day, Kakashi thought as he watched the blue sky, his arm wrapped around Maki and the sounds of Hito laughing in the air. It was a good day. Today was not a good day. Kakashi played gently with Hito, worry filling his chest. He was still in the park, waiting for Maki to show up and it was 7 o'clock. He had tested his team, had them pass, told the Hokage that Team 7 was an actual team and then gone to see if Hito had been picked up yet, which he hadn't, so he'd signed the boy out and taken him to the same park he had been at with the toddler and Maki yesterday, near the ice cream vendor. Maki still hadn't shown up yet. He wondered if something had gone wrong, but then shook his head. No, nothing had gone wrong, it couldn't have. This was the last day that she was working with Enbu. Nothing could go wrong. Kakashi-san? Kurenai stood over him and he looked up from Hito who was playing on his knees, what's wrong? Where's Tatsumaki-chan? Kakashi swallowed harshly, today was her last day. Yesterday was supposed to be her last day, but something happened so today is her last day. Something's wrong, she isn't home yet. Kurenai crouched down beside him. Kakashi-san, of what is this her last day? Maki-chan works no. Maki-chan worked for Enbu. Kakashi distracted Hito from playing with Kurenai's rap-style dress, she was supposed to be done yesterday but something happened and now today is her last day. He was allowed to say where she worked now. Only active Enbu shinobi wouldn't allowed to tell. Maki wasn't active with an Enbu now. Kakashi-san, can you tell me when Tatsumaki-chan usually meets you here? Kakashi thought that Kurenai was being awfully cautious with him. She's usually here or at home around 5. She said this morning, 5, like usual. We always come here if we aren't going to meet at home. Kurenai's eyes widened just a little, at home? She repeated. She shook her head and licked her lips, could she have gone home instead? She may have forgotten that you were meeting here. Thinking about it, Kakashi didn't think that it was a possibility. He knew that Maki never forgot where her son was supposed to be. Kurenai-san, he whispered, I'm worried about her mission. I've never seen her on her mission and I don't know where it is that she goes, or what it is that she does. It's a long-term mission, Kakashi-san. Kurenai rocked back on her heels a little, she could look different on her mission. Angry on Maki's behalf, scared for her, Kakashi shook his head, what the hell would Enbu need with an 12-year-old anyway? I mean, she wasn't even put on a genin team, just sucked into their world and sent on a 5-fucking-year-long mission and she's scared physically of men, and she's too young to have a child, and she comes home sometimes with this look in her eyes, like she doesn't think she's going to make it. The stridency in his voice lost vigor and he cuddled Hito to his chest protectively, but then she sees Hito-chan and we'll go for a walk, or play in the park or have dinner and just talk and her eyes brighten up but I can still see those shadows. Asuma and Anko had appeared sometime while he had been speaking and both of them held back as they watched Kurenai try to calm him. Kakashi-san, why don't you and Hito-chan go with Asuma-san back to your apartment? In case Tatsumaki-chan goes home and Anko and I will stay here and wait. If she goes home, Asuma can come and tell us and we'll bring her home if she comes here. Is that okay? He wasn't sure why he was being treated so kindly, like a victim, his mind told him, but he did think that Kurenai's plan was a good one. He had to feed Hito-chan properly after all. Hito must be hungry, he'd only had a little bit of food from the park vendors. Yeah, he stood, surprised that his legs felt so wobbly under him. Yeah, that sounds like a good plan. When Asuma reached out to take Hito from him, he didn't pass the child over, wanting to keep the boy close. He left the park with one last parting look of worry and despair. He had to focus on Hito now. He was responsible for Hito until Maki got home. Asuma didn't try to take Hito from him again, even when he was making an easy supper, juggling Hito in his hands with the meal. Kakashi didn't bother to ask if Asuma was going to eat with Hito and him since he was sure that the other man had already eaten. He didn't really want to share his space with Asuma after having shared it with Maki. With Maki missing, maybe hurt, Kakashi couldn't stand to let Asuma eat in his kitchen. Eat at the table that Maki ate at. Kakashi, Asuma's deep voice was kind and Kakashi hadn't ever heard that tone directed at himself before. Kakashi, you have to calm down. I am calm, Kakashi muttered, hugging Hito to him. No, you aren't, Asuma said gently, pointedly, you're scaring Hito-chan. Appalled at himself, Kakashi actually looked at the quiet child in his arms. Hito was wide-eyed, staring at nothing, his eyes flickering from moving object to moving object, whatever caught his attention. His little chubby face was blank, as though he were asleep, except that his non-expression was pinched, as though he were in pain. Oh, Hito-chan. I'm sorry. Shush, it's okay. Tashi-chan's not mad, it's okay. Kakashi tried to reassure Hito, even going so far as to draw down his mask and kiss the child on the forehead, rubbing their cheeks together. Hito clutched at the junin, tears rolling down his face. Ka-chan, where Ka-chan? He hiccuped into Kakashi's neck. Shush, it's okay. Ka-chan is okay. Kakashi stroked Hito's back, rocked back and forth, making sure to keep his breathing steady. Hito continued to cry silently, hiccuping and refusing to let go of Kakashi until he cried himself to sleep in Kakashi's arms, no longer under the influence of Kakashi's worry-tinged intent. Looking at the clock on the wall, Asuma grimaced. Kakashi, he kept his voice low, you should probably get some sleep. We have team meetings tomorrow morning. I'll be fine, Kakashi muttered to him. I don't want to not be here when Maki comes home. He rocked Hito in his arms, looking down at the child, but maybe. I'll put Hito to bed. He stood and Asuma followed him silently down the hall to the guest bedroom. Though it wasn't much of a guest bedroom anymore, having been attacked with several almost neon colors of paint by Maki in an artistic mood and the small bed with railings that had replaced the single bed. Maki hadn't slept here since she'd spent the week, but she and Hito had been over every day since then. Kakashi had thought it an excellent investment to get a child's bed so that if Hito got tired before Maki decided it was time to go home, they could put him to bed. Hito had stayed the night a few times with Kakashi already. The copy nin felt suffused with warmth and his chest tightened every time he thought about how much Maki trusted him, letting her son stay the night with him. As he expertly changed the drowsing boy into a pair of blue pajamas with orange toads and brown dogs on them, Asuma watched, a little surprised at how reflexive it was for Kakashi, how easy it was for him to do these things. Kakashi kissed Hito on both cheeks when he lay the boy down and turned the pale blue night light on before closing the door most of the way behind Asuma and himself on the way out. Kakashi. Asuma trailed off, unsure of how to go about asking his questions or making his comments. Throwing himself onto the couch, Kakashi scuffed the floor with one foot. I'm worried. He hissed angrily. I don't know what's happened, I don't know how long she'll be gone. I don't know if she's even alive. Before Asuma could say anything, Kakashi continued, I'm scared of what might have happened. I mean, she had problems yesterday, that's why today was supposed to be her last day. But now she's not home, and I don't know what's going on. I can't even go to Anbu and ask because you know how fucking uptight they're about their active agents. She's still active until she comes home. His voice trailed off and he stared at his hands blankly. He was used to an enemy he could fight, and this was an enemy that he couldn't fight. In fact, there wasn't an enemy to fight in this circumstance. "Tell me, Kakashi, is Tatsumaki-san strong?" Asuma asked after a short while of quiet. A frown appeared on Kakashi's face and he looked to his friend. "Of course. She's one of the strongest people I know." "Then you have to trust that she'll be okay. She'll survive, and if she can survive, she'll be able to recover." Kakashi buried his face in his shaking hands. "Have you ever known anyone when they were in Anbuyu, Asuma?" He doubted that Asuma's answer would be yes, because active agents in Anbuyu didn't usually reveal their affiliations until after they had gotten out. It wasn't that they were looked down on for being with the seduction division. Rather, they were looked up to. It took an unusually strong individual to survive Anbuyu, and everyone knew it. But Anbuyu was private. They held their secrets close and never showed their hand before the ideal time. It had been a shock when Kakashi had figured out who Maki worked with. He'd never heard her say who she worked with though, even when he had vaguely indicated he knew. "No," Asuma shook his head, "no, I haven't known anyone when they were active." Kakashi flinched. "It hurts," he finally said. Before Asuma could respond, the front door opened, Anko leading the way into the apartment, followed closely by Kurenai. It took a moment for Kakashi to see Maki in between them, Maki being so much shorter than the other women. "Maki-chan," Kakashi shot to his feet, relief clear on his face and in his voice. While Maki stared at him in disappointment and fear and self-hatred, Anko and Kurenai took a few moments to gape at Kakashi's uncovered face. Kakashi stopped short of touching Maki, inspecting her visually for injuries. Her hair was tangled and her face red with anger. Her clothing was ripped in some places and he could see where she had bled, though the wounds were closed. He supposed that Anbuyu Nin knew various medic jutsu specified to their needs. Her eyes though were the worst. They were shadowed and empty. When he reached out his hand for her to take, she flinched away from him. "Don't touch me," she cut herself off and steeled her quivering jaw. "Where is Hirohito?" Sharply attentive to Maki's emotions, Kakashi blinked, withdrawing his hand. "Hito-chan is in his room, Tatsumaki-san." He couldn't call her Maki, not now, not when she was in mild shock. She'd had enough troubles today. No matter what he'd gone through while waiting for her, she had been the one to go through it physically. It felt like he was being stabbed in the heart, the way she edged around him, her gaze flickering between Asuma and him, refusing to let either of them out of her sight. When she got to the hall, she dashed to Hito's room, closing the door behind her. "Gods!" Kakashi pressed his hand to his forehead and took a shuddering breath. What happened to her? Anko shuffled her feet. She arrived at the park pretty frantic. "She wouldn't let us touch her though. All she wanted to know was where her son was. We brought her here." Kurenai pursed her lips. "She must have been using a Anbuyu technique because I saw rope burns on her wrists when she got to the park, but they're gone now." Kakashi wanted to curse, but restrained himself. Rope burns. Cuts. She'd probably healed the bruises as well. He closed his eyes and took several deep breaths to calm himself. He couldn't show any anger in front of Maki. She had been injured and traumatized. Again, he could only hope that it was from when she'd gotten away and not because Anbuyu had given her a mission where this sort of thing happened all the time. Hito's door opened quietly and all four adults turned to see Maki poke her head out and look at them. Her eyes were so blue and so wide that it hurt Kakashi to see. There was a fear in her eyes that scared him too. He had to wonder if that wasn't one of the reasons that she'd been taken in by Anbuyu, the way she looked so waifish and small and broken. He knew that some very sick people liked that kind of look. Kakashi would rather the strong and bright and lively Maki back. She stepped out of Hito's room and took a few tentative steps towards the living room and front door, her arms protectively around a still sleeping Hito. I should go. I have to go now. Maki-san. Maybe he could compromise between her nickname and a polite suffix, Kakashi thought. She flinched from him, though less than she had the first time. "Hi, Kakashi-san?" "I apologize," he whispered, and before he could say that he was sorry for scaring her, she reared back in shock, pressing herself up against the wall. He didn't know what he'd done wrong, but she was absolutely terrified of him at the moment. Anko and Kurenai stepped between Kakashi and Maki immediately, Senbon threaded in between Anko's fingers defensively and Kurenai's fingers twisted into a half-seal, already calling on her chakra. Don't even, Anko hissed at him, don't take another step. Maki's eyes fell from Kakashi to Anko and the teenager licked her lips, reaching out with a shaking hand to touch the Tokubetsu Junin's elbow. Anko, it's okay. He just startled me. Anko looked over her shoulder at the young woman and finally nodded, stepping down from her ready stance. Kurenai unfolded her fingers, but continued to stand between Maki and Kakashi. They were quick to help the girl shuffle out of the apartment, leaving Kakashi to stare at the door, his heart in his stomach. Maki must have been hurt so badly. He couldn't comprehend the pain she must have been going through. He could only hope that she didn't decide to leave him completely, that she would allow him to help her. He knew it wasn't fair of him to be wanting her back in his life so much that he'd push her into it, but he couldn't let her go. But he had to. He had to let her go because otherwise she surely would leave, and leave completely, taking everything she'd brought into his life with her. Kakashi, Asuma gripped his shoulder tight and Kakashi looked at him, unsure. Give her some time. She'll need someone to talk to and she trusts you. No, she doesn't, Kakashi murmured. She took Hito and she left. She doesn't trust me at all. She's scared. She'll probably need a few days to center herself, Kakashi. But, as you said, Tatsumaki-san is strong. She survived, and now she'll recover. You can help her do that. How? Kakashi thought his question sounded a little desperate, but Asuma didn't comment on it. By being whatever she needs. If she needs someone to hate, be that person. If she needs someone to confess to, be that person. If she needs someone's hand to hold, offer yours. Asuma gave Kakashi a half smile, having to put effort into it. It will take time, but you. He paused, as though he were about to say something else, then changed his mind. You're willing to wait, ah? Yes, Kakashi nodded, realizing the truth of his friend's words. He would wait, and he was most willing to wait. If he could help Maki, he would. He just hoped that she would let him help. It had taken weeks to get back to about where they'd been before Maki's last day with Enbuyu, and Kakashi was happy that she had been letting him help. He thought that she was getting better a lot quicker than she would have if he hadn't have been allowed to. Obviously the additional help from Anko and Kurenai was good for her as well. Occasionally he worried that she was hiding her fear of him under her training to be a battle shinobi, but that those thoughts were put to rest soon enough. Having never been a battle shinobi, Maki was working hard at the skills that her friends were willing to show her in their free time, which was pretty much anything she asked. Her taijutsu was coming along nicely, Kakashi had learned from Guy. He also got an unofficial report from Anko that Maki had excellent aim and hand-eye coordination, but little experience with kunai. She was learning fast though. From what Kakashi had been told from Kurenai, Maki was either completely unsuited for, or was an idiot savant, at genjutsu. After 2 weeks of intense work, Kurenai still didn't know which category Maki fell under. There was something brewing under all of Maki's returning cheer though, and Kakashi was worried about how it would come out. Deciding that he had to confront Maki about the underlying problem with him, so they could get it out and discuss it and work it out, he made sure that all 4 of their friends, Guy, Anko, Kurenai, and Asuma, knew that he was going to be talking to her seriously. Anko and Kurenai promptly put in a bid to babysit the 2-year-old who had started to actually speak instead of babble, and Kakashi agreed. He trusted the daycare, but he trusted Anko and Kurenai far more. I can get my team to meet me on a Saturday, they wouldn't mind, Kurenai mused, planning a picnic and some fun on the weekend with a baby. Kakashi frowned and shook his head. I don't think that's a good idea. He commented, your team. He trailed off, unsure of why he didn't want to say anything more. He didn't want to tell the woman that Hito looked like someone her team had gone to the academy with. A grin spread over Asuma's face. Well, we can give Hito-chan one of your masks, hide who he is. A slow grin made its way over Kakashi's face and he nodded. Hito-chan does like to wear masks, doesn't he? It was a good plan. Kurenai could convince Maki that she wanted to babysit and take Hito for the afternoon, giving the boy a mask as soon as Maki was out of sight, and then she could entertain Hito while his mother and Kakashi worked out whatever there was to work out. With the plan set, Kakashi waited patiently for Saturday. It came quickly. So Kurenai has Hito-chan? He asked, leading Maki to one of the outermost training areas. It wasn't as far from Konoha proper as the training ground Maki went to with Guy, so she didn't seem worried about the distance between Konoha and where Kakashi stopped. Hi, Maki smiled brightly. She still wants a baby, and who am I to deny her the opportunity to babysit? She laughed and Kakashi laughed along with her. His laugh didn't sound nearly as happy as Maki's and she noticed immediately. Kakashi? What's wrong? He didn't know how to ease her into this conversation. He didn't want to hurt her though. Maki-chan, when you came home from your last day on your mission, I apologized. She blanched and he continued, I was apologizing for scaring you, but I didn't get to finish telling you that. Maki closed her arms around her torso, blinking and lifting her head at a stubborn angle, and? She asked, voice fluctuating in intense emotional upheaval. Why did you react like you did? He wanted to know why she hadn't trusted him. He'd spent over 6 months getting to know her and her son and she'd just run like he was a dangerous stranger. Maki lowered her head and turned her face away. I can't really explain, she whispered, Was it something that I did? Kakashi begged for an answer. He had to know how to fix this mistake that he'd made with her. Was it something that I didn't do? You didn't come for me. Maki suddenly shouted, looking into his gray eye, you didn't fucking come for me. This time was Kakashi's time to rear back in shock. It was over and done with at 1300 hours and I was left there, tied down and I couldn't get out and you never came for me. Maki-chan, Kakashi shook his head, I told you. I said that I would be at the park at 5. She poked him hard in the chest with an accusing finger. When I didn't show up, why didn't you look for me? Maki-chan, you were on a mission, I couldn't just. I don't fucking care. You were supposed to like me, I thought you knew me. You were supposed to help me. And you left me for hours by myself, alone, and scared and unable to get away and you. Maki broke down, tears running down her face. Kakashi moved in, opening his arms. Maki lunged at him, curling up into his body, holding tight to his vest. You left me, you bastard. And I trust you so much and you stomped on that like it isn't worth anything. There was only one thing that relieved Kakashi about Maki's outburst, and it was that Maki said that she trusted him in present tense, and not in past tense. That meant that she still trusted him, even after not looking for her and leaving her alone for hours and hours. His arms came up around her and held her close, rocking her back and forth as he hugged her and she cried out her anger at him. He wouldn't do anything to hurt her again, he couldn't. It just couldn't happen because when she was hurt, he could feel it. He could see each hurt in her face and beautiful eyes and it hurt him when she shied from his touch or shivered from fear. It was a long time before Maki, and Kakashi for that matter, calmed down significantly enough to continue talking with each other. Though now with the major secret out in the open, they found it oddly easy to just whisper most of their secrets and fears to each other, huddled together under a tree in the fading light of afternoon. When the sun was just setting, Kakashi helped Maki to her feet and they brushed the grass off of their clothing and smiled shyly at one another. Kakashi pulled his mask back up and they made their way towards Kurenai's house, hand in hand. They found her genin team still there, Hito laying curled up to Inuzuka Kiba's thigh, the white Akamaru clutched tight in his arms. Kurenai, Kakashi shuffled towards the Junin in her kitchen while Maki went to the couch and her son. Kakashi, how did it go? We managed to get most of it worked out, I think, he told her softly. They watched the genin team look between Maki, Hito, and Kakashi, drawing the same conclusion that Asuma had once made when he'd seen the toddler wearing a mask that matched Kakashi's. Hyuga Hinata was the one to shore up the bravery and wander into the kitchen and blush, folding her fingers together. Anyo, Kakashi-sensei? She asked in the softest voice Kakashi had ever heard anyone speak in. Hito-chan is Tatsumaki-san's son, correct? Yes, Kakashi replied blandly, pretty sure he knew where she was going to go next. And you are? Hinata lowered her voice even more, dating? Yes, Hinata-kun, Kakashi smiled, proud that he could see improvement with the girl's shyness in such a short period of time after working with Kurenai. Oh, Hinata blushed crimson, opened her mouth to say something more but then practically bolted from the room before anything came out. Kakashi and Kurenai shared a look and both shook their head, amused and pleased with the girl. Kakashi, we can go home now. Maki stood up from the couch and Kakashi wandered his way over to the teenager and her son. Is Hito-chan still asleep? He asked, stepping into her personal space and looking over her shoulder at Hito in her arms. He was more than pleased that she didn't flinch from him in any way, shape, or form. She still trusted him. Yes, she smiled down at her son and leaned back into his arms. Maki-chan, Kakashi called out over the running water of the woman's shower. I'm going to be home late tonight. Hito giggled as he ran past the Junin wearing only a bright blue t-shirt. Kakashi rolled his eyes at the toddler and turned back to the bathroom door, waiting for Maki to answer him. I was kinda expecting you to pick Hito-chan up this afternoon, Kakashi. She called back, what are you doing that's holding you late? Picking up a set of training underpants and black ninja pants for Hito, Kakashi waited for Hito to run by again before grabbing the giggling boy and tossing him lightly on the couch a foot away. The 2-year-old landed softly and managed to tangle himself up as he tried to scramble to his feet. I have to talk to one of my students, Sakura-chan. Kakashi tickled the boy a bit before starting the arduous task of getting him dressed. I have to start going over kunoichi specialities with her. Oh, Maki exited the bathroom, dressed and rubbing a towel to her short hair, and the other two? Just regular stuff, Kakashi murmured, smiling down at Hito and bending to blow a raspberry against his tummy before tugging the pants on him. Sparring, some taijutsu. Endurance training for the most part. Kakashi was glad that Hito was a fast learner. That meant that even though Hito had turned 2 only a few months ago, he was already toilet trained. For the most part, he only needed a diaper during the night. Sounds fun. Maki smirked at him, obviously aware of how much fun that kind of discussion would be for Kakashi. I was invited out for supper with Anko and Kurenai tonight, so I guess that I could take Hito-chan with me. Kurenai would be happy to see him again. Well, Kakashi mused, letting the boy up. Hito hugged him around the neck before running to his mother. If you don't mind Hito being around Sakura-chan, I can still take him. We aren't going to be doing anything other than talking. Maki frowned, settling Hito on her hip, but you already said that Hito looks just like your student, the Uzumaki. She trailed off, I know how most of the village treats him. I don't want Hito-chan enduring something similar because Sakura thinks it's okay to treat Uzumaki badly. Kakashi went over to the young woman and nodded in understanding, placing a hand on Hito's messy hair. I'll put him in a mask, like when Kurenai had her team watch him with her. Leaning into his warmth, Maki sighed. I'm pretty sure that Team 8 thinks that Hito-chan is our kid, not just mine, because of that mask. Heart beating unnaturally fast, Kakashi didn't show his apprehension. Do you mind them thinking that? He asked cautiously. To tell the truth, Kakashi didn't mind being known as Hito's father if it helped protect either, or both, Hito and Maki. To tell the truth, Kakashi wanted to be known as Hito's father. But it was up to Maki, so he waited for her answer. He hadn't wasted his hope. No, Maki's eyes softened and she smiled at him in the most intimate way. No, Kakashi, I don't mind at all. I just want Hito-chan to be loved and, you do that. Thank you. Kakashi took Maki and Hito into his arms and hugged them, whispering his words into Maki's ear. She had no idea how much he cherished being allowed into their lives. As blood-stained and dangerous as he was, they treated him as though he were merely a man and not an occasional monster. A knock on their door and Asuma's bellow from the hall pulled them apart and they raced around the apartment for a moment, making sure that they had everything that they needed for their day. Before Maki could flicker off with Hito to the daycare, Kakashi grasped her hand tight and in an absent movement, kissed her forehead when he asked her stay safe for the day while they stood together in Kakashi's open front door. She stared at him with wide eyes for a moment before smiling broadly and nodding. I will, believe it. She blushed and ducked her face away for a moment before looking him straight in the eye and kissing his cheek with a broad grin on her face. You too, Kakashi, and then she was gone. Asuma strung an arm around his shoulders. Did I just witness a landmark in the relationship of Kakashi and Maki? He asked out of the corner of his mouth. Kakashi pursed his lips and then nodded. If there were any people that he could trust, Asuma was one of them. I think so. Congrats, man, Asuma nudged his shoulder and then detached himself from Kakashi. They parted with a wave and Kakashi wondered how he was supposed to train his genin while he was so distracted. It turned out that it wasn't that hard. Though when he'd asked for Sakura to stay behind and dismissed the boys, it was strange that neither of them argued with him. Sakura stared after Sasuke with little hearts in her eyes as he left and Kakashi wanted to palm his face because seriously? She couldn't be a little more mature? Alright, we have to go get someone before we start. Kakashi jumped down from the tree he was sitting in and started back into Konoha proper. Sakura hummed and hawed for a bit before she managed to shore up the confidence to question him. "Who are we getting, sensei?" "The most important person in the village," he told her, and her eyes got amazingly wide. "Hokage-sama?" she whispered in disbelief, and Kakashi had to remind himself that Genin rarely, if ever, understood who the most important people in the world were, who the kings were, as Asuma liked to put it. No, someone more important. Instead of explaining, Kakashi turned down the road to the daycare, and when he paused at the gate, Sakura frowned. "What are we doing at the daycare, sensei?" "You know it, then?" he asked, and she nodded arrogantly, as though she was superior to others for knowing something. "I used to come and babysit on the weekends." She jut her chin out just a little and smirked. "I was the only one in class that had a weekend job, and I freely spent my time looking after the kids." She stressed freely, like it was important, and kids, like she wanted to replace it with brats. Kakashi was not impressed. "Ah, Kakashi-san." Mito waved the two of them in. She gave Kakashi a sly smile that Sakura obviously missed. "You've come to pick up your son, then?" Sakura gaped in shock. "Yup. Is he ready to leave for the day?" Mito smiled and nodded. "Genma-san was just helping us get him down from the rafters." Kakashi had to laugh at that. Hito liked high places. The higher the better. Sounds like Hito-chan. Tu-chan. Hito came barreling out of the playroom at full tilt, and Kakashi barely had the mind to catch the boy. Hito had called him Tu-chan instead of Tashi-chan, like he usually did. He couldn't shake that off, but he did manage to fake his way past signing Hito out of the daycare and gestured for Sakura to follow along behind him as he carried Hito back towards Training Ground 7. "Kakashi-sensei?" Sakura was still gaping. You're married?" She blinked. "But, I've never seen a ring." Kakashi inwardly sighed as he settled his mind from Hito's surprise. No matter that Sakura had 4 years of academy and 2.5 months of genin training under her belt, she was still very much civilian in mind indeed. "Shinobi don't wear rings when they're working, Sakura-chan. That's like asking to get your finger torn off," he commented lightly as he landed gently on the ground in front of the memorial rock just outside of the training ground. His hands flashed though a quick parenting jutsu that tied a chakra leash from a child to a stationary object. He used Hito and the stone itself. Thankfully Kakashi had done a quick pat down of the boy because he found and took 2 permanent markers off the boy before letting him out of his arms. It wouldn't do for Hito to draw on the memorial stone. Fortunately Kakashi was able to skip most of the introductory things he was supposed to talk to Sakura about because she was such an avid reader and never let a textbook go unopened. The bad part was that she already had the awkward questions ready to ask that she definitely wasn't ready to hear answers to. "So," Sakura blushed deeply, "these jutsu that some kunoichi use." Kakashi resolutely kept his eyes on Hito. "They're used during?" Her voice squeaked at the end and Kakashi nodded. "Some of them, yes. If you were to be chosen by Anbu you would get full training in those arts." The 13-year-old girl giggled and hid her cheeks under her hands. "I bet they'd totally give me an edge over Ino Pig." And then she giggled again. Kakashi was not impressed. He was going to try and halt her bad behavior before it became a habit. "Sakura, I have a hypothetical question for you." She perked right up. "I'm really good with hypothetical, sensei." "Say you were taken into Anbu U right out of graduation and trained in all the arts they have to offer, including ones that they don't let anyone outside of their division know about." She giggled again, her blush rising. "Say that you learned all these arts." She nodded eagerly. "And now imagine that you've been sent on a mission where you are to seduce and have with an abusive, cheating husband because the wife wants proof of infidelity. You need to acquire pictures of yourself having with your customer's husband because he beats the ever-living crap out of her and she wants out." Sakura's face was no longer red, but bone white. "Sensei? Now say that you managed to complete your mission. You got the man to sleep with a 13-year-old girl and give his wife the pictures." Kakashi continued, his voice hard and unyielding, "And then, when you go for your physical to be cleared for duty, you find out that you, the 13-year-old girl, are pregnant." Sakura collapsed to her knees, staring at him in something close to horror. Kakashi doesn't take his eyes off Hito, needing to watch the innocence of the boy as he spoke. "What would you do with that baby, sensei?" Sakura's voice was tiny and she sounded faint. "Listen to me, Sakura. Kakashi crouched down beside her and finally looked her in the eye. Being shinobi is not a game. You don't become a ninja to fight your friends over a boy. Konoha wouldn't do that, sensei, Sakura stuttered. Konoha wouldn't send a 13-year-old to do that. Kakashi gave a grim smile. Yes, he said softly, it would. He gave her a moment to compose herself. So now I want something from you, Sakura. I want you to grow up. I want you to show me that you truly want to be shinobi. That you aren't just a civilian playing at excitement for marriage prospects. Sakura looked up at him with watery green eyes. But I'm the oldest one on the team, Kakashi-sensei. I am grown up. Sakura, Kakashi sat down, stretching his legs out in front of himself. I know a girl who started raising a child when she was a year older than you. She is shinobi. She raised her kid by herself while on a mission. She is grown up. You run around playing ninja, wearing makeup and perfume that will get your team killed on a real mission, and looking to Sasuke for an indication that he likes you. Hito crawled out of the tall grass and stretched himself out over Kakashi's legs. Kakashi stroked his hair gently. Sakura sat in silence, thinking about what he'd said. Hopefully it wouldn't go over her head. Hopefully she'd pull it together and step up, taking her ninja career seriously. Kakashi would prefer a kunoichi with Maki's maturity on his team, rather than one with Sakura's. Hito leaned back into his chest and played with the metal plate on the back of the shinobi's glove. Kakashi chuckled and moved his attention to his son, letting Sakura think about what he had told her.
That's all for now. If you enjoyed this video, then please like, share and do comments.